The Dipole Shield. A science fiction action adventure comedy, the Dipole Series, Book 6, written by Chris Lowry, narrated by Steve Downes. Chapter 1. The concrete walls were an exercise in monotony. Mona Lisa O'Neill sat on the thin mattress with her legs crossed and stared at them. Zen, she thought. I'm being zen. She had that thought for hours on end, day after day. The walls in front of her were 8 feet long, 8 feet high, solid construction with no visible grooves except where it met the ceiling and floor. Her back leaned against its twin 5 feet away. A 5 by 8 space to call her own for the next 5 years. At first, she tried to be optimistic about it. 5 years was better than 20 the prosecutor had threatened her with. 5 months into her first year, she wasn't so sure. The cell was unadorned on purpose, plain. Not as a form of punishment, but because almost every government facility on Mars was Spartan, on purpose. She would know millions of those credits had flown through her hands. Buster's hands, she corrected, although she had a part in it. He was why she was here, though. She made no mistake about that. Mona Lisa stared at 3 tiny-inch port that shot regulated air into the room, though she had never seen Earth except in pictures. She could draw lines in her head for the continents and blue waters, though she had never seen a real ocean, never seen a blue sky. Even with all the money, she had never taken a trip back to Earth, which preyed on her. Time alone gave her time to think about regrets, about getting involved with a notorious gangster who ran entire sections of the hubs and space stations that dotted the galaxy between home and Earth. Regret made her angry at him, angry at herself. So she practiced Zen, breathing, which she was doing when the door opened and one of the guards peeked in. "What are you looking at?" she snapped. Mona Lisa knew she had that look. She had been called beautiful for her whole life, a gift from her Irish father and Italian mother, and some genetic lottery that made her features perfect by a dozen standards. The kind of face men went to war over. "Get up, inmate." She didn't recognise him, but he didn't seem impressed by her looks. He waited by the door while she slipped her legs over the edge of her bed and stood to stretch, taking her time. In prison, there's nothing but time and little distraction. Whatever it was could keep her mind occupied for the next few months. "Move." She sauntered to the door, swishing and swaying in a way that drove most males crazy. Buster had told her once she oozed sexy, and she knew exactly what that meant, and how to work it, so she got her way. The guard stared at her with flat eyes. She wouldn't want to play poker with him either, because his face was an emotionless mask. Unconventionally handsome, she thought, as she tried to brush up against him and bring him around. But he was fast, slipping her past so she would be in the hall, and he was still in the doorway. Right. He didn't need to point. His was a voice used to giving orders and having them followed. He stood straight, arms to his side, and towered over a 5'2" frame by almost a foot. Most of the guards kept their hands on their pleather prison issue belts with standard taser guns close by. Not this one, though. He looked relaxed, unconcerned. It kind of hurt her feelings that he didn't consider her a threat. "Where are we going?" She added a suggestive lit to her voice, a promise of pleasures and innuendo. "Warden, inmate," he nodded. That shut her up. She had seen the warden once upon being delivered to the penal institution and remembered him as a sweaty scarecrow of a man who got nervous at the sight of her, but she had no reason to be called to his office before. "Why?" she asked, but the mask didn't move, didn't tell her anything. The guard just kept staring, waiting for her to follow his orders. After a moment, she did. Chapter 2. Mona Lisa O'Neill. The warden couldn't look at her. He fumbled with a digital tablet and his sweaty palms. "Reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against one Buster Ross, a.k.a. Buster the Butcher, a.k.a. Buster the Balustrade." He stopped and glanced up at her, licking his lips. "What's a balustrade?" Mona Lisa shifted the weight on her 5'2" frame from one hip to the other and gave him a practised "go screw yourself" look. It came easy to her beautiful face. "Never mind." His finger swiped on the screen of the tablet. and he stuck his tongue between his lips as he typed in the word. "How do you spell that?" he asked, distracted. "Bally... you," said the guard behind Mona Lisa. She turned and gazed over her shoulder at him, a look she had given many men with the expectation that they'd turn to jelly and fall at her feet to offer the sun, the moon, and the stars at night. He just gave her a smirk. "Strade," the warden finished spelling. "An ornament. Oh." He glanced up at her, still nervous. "Why did they call him that?" "Because he ripped one off one time and used it to beat one of his enemies to death." She said it rough, to see what effect it had on the authority figure in front of her. He wiped his damp brow again. "Oh, allegedly," she amended. "Of course," said the warden. "And then he tried to kill you. He threatened to destroy the dipole shield." "So?" She rolled her eyes. "He made lots of threats. It's what he does." "The Martian government is taking this very seriously," the warden answered. "Good for them. They are treating it as a terrorist act." "Sounds like one, but Buster is a big boy." Fold studied the tablet on his desk, unable to look at her. "Do you even know what the dipole shield is?" She shrugged her still toned shoulders, courtesy of constant working out in her cell. That and meditation were her only hobbies, the only thing she was allowed to do. Prisons on Mars wasn't designed like it had been on Earth. Since everything was shipped in, and there was a high cost associated with the shipping, prisons on Mars were a bare bones operation. Literally. The walls were poured concrete, the floors and ceiling the same, all hired out to a minimum bidder who could build the construction and keep it from the Martian atmosphere at a low cost. No frills meant no television, no books, no movies, no education. Prison on Mars meant time spent in a single cell, alone. Nothing to distract a person from thinking about their crime and counting down the time. There were a lot of suicides in Martian prisons, but not Mona Lisa. She worked out and practiced her breathing. If she wanted to die, she would have let Buster succeed in killing her. Nope. She planned to do her time and use it to better her inner self and sculpt her outer self with bodyweight exercises. Plus it gave plenty of time to plan revenge. "It's what keeps us all safe," the warden told her. "Like space soldiers?" "Don't they teach you this in school?" "I didn't pay attention." He couldn't look at her, not out of disgust at her education or lack thereof, but of her sheer beauty. It literally took his breath away and left him slack-jawed, catatonic. Brain vapour locked as he tried to think of things to say. Better not to look at all and study fine contours of the slick tablet on his desk. "You know, that's the problem with younger generations of Martians." He ran his finger along the edge of the device. "No sense of history, just pop rock music and wrist communicator selfies." "Yeah, I had plenty time for both. What with the water shortages and weekly food riots?" Fold shifted in his creaky wooden chair. "That's still no reason to turn to crime," he lectured, still not looking. "The government says poor people can still act civilized despite the obstacles they face, in fact." "Warden." The guard said his name in a tone and manner that made the warden practically snap to attention. "Right," Fold spluttered. "Timetable." He swiped the screen of the tablet on his desk and paused. "The threat is real. Buster is planning to blow up the dipole shield. If that happens, all life on Mars is dead." "So, go arrest him." "We can't find him." "Not my problem." "You're on Mars." "In a cell," she said. "What do I care?" "There are 50 million people on this planet." "So?" she said again. Folds grunted and glanced over her shoulder to the giant guard towering over her. "That should make our choice easier." "What choice?" she asked. Folds wouldn't make eye contact with her. He studied the tablet again. "He said we should trade you for the ship the bomb is located on." Mona Lisa sat up straighter in her chair and gauged the distance to the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to plot an escape, somewhere to hide. "What do you mean, trade?" "You versus 50 million. Folds finally looked at her, his forehead was still a dripping mess, but something about the 50 million deaths, including his own, allowed him to meet her eyes. The math is simple. "You can't do that," she spluttered. "I would," he snapped his fingers, "like that." The guard cleared his throat. Folds flinched back in his chair. "But you get one shot, 48 hours to find that ship and stop him." "What do you want me to do?" If she had gum, she'd be smacking it as she glared up at him from under arched eyebrows gone wild during her sentence. The warden wiped flop sweat from his balding pate as he tried not to stare at errand hairs on her ample bosom, pushed up on display over her crossed arms. "Could you zip up?" She realised his discomfort and shifted forward in practised ease, putting her closer to him. "It wasn't a request, inmate." The guard behind her was not impressed, or he was dead below the waist. "What are you, dickless?" He put a gentle hand on her elbow and eased her inches back from the warden. "My dick works fine. Now zip." "Oh yeah." She grinned and pressed up against him. "Working now." Bat reached down and pulled the zipper up with a loud sound that bounced off the bare concrete walls. "Zipper works." "Dickless." She sniffed and put her hands on her hips. Another practice move. Too easy. "Nice act, princess." Bat twirled her around to face the warden. Folds cleared his throat and wiped his forehead with a grungy bandana. "You're going to stop him." "Me?" she snorted. "How?" "You're his fiancée." "Ex." "You'll still have a connection." "He tried to have me killed." The warden held up a gig stick. "But he writes you every day." Her dark eyes flashed. "You've been holding my email," she snarled. Mona Lisa drew back her hand and threw a roundhouse punch at Folds. Bat caught her wrist and twisted her into a spin that brought her into his arms, but forward. Her wrist folded up between her shoulders. "That hurts," she whined. "It's supposed to." Folds dripped sweat onto her empty desktop. He dropped the tiny portable stick drive into his coat pocket. "You'll get this when you get back." She blew a raspberry with her lips. "You want me to do something for you, and in exchange I get what? Mail?" Fold sat behind his desk, putting distance between him and the beautiful woman. "What else do you want?" "I want out." He shook his head. "I can't let you out." "Look, from what you're telling me, Buster is going to blow up the planet and kill everybody, right? I think that deserves some freedom. I can't do that." "Then who can?" She glanced over her shoulder. "This guy?" Chapter 3. "Am I supposed to just follow you?" Mona Lisa planted herself against the wall in the hall and rubbed her delicate wrist where the cuffs had worn them raw. "You don't follow me," Bat instructed. "You're in front of me at all times." He made a motion with two fingers that pointed to his eyes, then flipped them to point at her. "You're never out of my sight." "What if I need to go to the lavatory?" She tilted her head in a way that men found irresistible. He resisted. "I'll be outside the door." "Listening, perv." He reached out for her arm to drag her down the hall, but she slipped past his grip and led the way. "Where are we going anyway?" She sauntered. The way she moved her hips would drive most men insane with lust. She had a little extra swiggle, since nothing else seemed to be working on the guard. A lot of women let themselves go in prison, but not Mona Lisa. She spent most of her time in meditation and mind-numbing exercise. There weren't many people on the planet who could crank out a couple of thousand ass to grass air squats, but she had built up to that number. It kept things toned, tight and well-shaped, she thought. She would have to do something about the jumpsuit they gave her, though. Mona Lisa glanced over her shoulder fast in an effort to catch Bat staring at her ass, and thus win a psychological advantage over him. His dead flat eyes met hers in a bored stare, as if he had seen it all before. She curled up a lip in a sneer and kept walking. "Turn left," he told her. She did, and met a pass-through, manned by two other guards. They stared, they licked their lips and puffed up their chests. This was a reaction she had been planning for from Bat. It was good to know she still had the effect on most men. Normal men, she amended. Going on a date? The taller guard directed his question to Bat, but never took his eyes off her. She played with a zipper on her frumpy jumpsuit so it lowered to show creamy white skin on her chest, and back up again in a manner the tall guard found hypnotic. Open the gate, Bat ordered. The short one slid off the stool he had been occupying and meandered to the gate controls, watching Mona Lisa the whole time. You boys never seen a woman before, Bat tried to hurry them up. Not like this, the tall one sighed. Mona Lisa winked. This one's going to be no fun. She teased her full bottom lip with the top of her pink tongue. But you two look like we could have a good time. They nodded like dogs waiting for instruction and a treat. Gate, Bat snapped. They flinched and this time looked away from her. The tall one saw the look on Bat's face and shoved the short one out of the way to open the gate and the one beyond it. It wasn't standard procedure, but he didn't want to piss the man off watching him with cold eyes. Usually they kept one gate closed at a time, in case an inmate made a desperate run for the tube that led to the monorail shuttle, a safety measure. The tall guard wanted Bat to have clear access to wherever he went, and he did not want to get blamed in case the large man decided someone needed blaming. Sir, he snapped off a salute and didn't know why. The short one popped to attention next to him. Bat put a hand on Mona Lisa's elbow to get her attention from watching the two men no longer staring at her. It led her through the openings and into a tiled foyer beyond. Neat trick, she said. You could make this easy, he told her out of the side of his mouth. Not on your life. Maybe on yours, he warned her. He led her to an enclosed tube with a moving walkway and pushed her on in front of him. Mona Lisa struggled for balance for a moment, then posed as the tube led under a dark mount of rock, lit with pools of LED lights that cast a weak glow. What is this? You came in on a shuttle. Bat didn't sound like a tour guide. You saw the landing bay. This is how working Joes get to the prison. The walkway carried them 500 yards into a small, vast cavern. Mona Lisa let her eyes wander across the ceiling, and after a moment she realised it was a clear dome covered in red dust. The conveyor deposited them onto a plain, unadorned platform that ended next to a monorail track. She looked left and right to see another larger tunnel that entered the dome on one side and exited on the other. Are we going? To Musk. Bat nodded. She tried to suppress a grin and a jump for joy. Musk was huge, the first colony on Mars, and a hub for spacebound activity. It didn't matter what the guard needed to do there or from there. Mona Lisa knew it would be a simple task to ditch Bat and get lost forever in the crowds and chaos of a couple dozen miles away. Chapter 4. Musk. It started as 4 domes bolted to the surface of Mars when an enterprising entrepreneur made a bet on humanity expanding beyond Earth and onto the Red Planet. The discovery of rare metals in the asteroid belt orbiting between Mars and Jupiter turned the science experiment in colonization into a jumping-off point for space miners and catapulted the Dome City into one of the most populated places in the galaxy. Domes popped up like pimples on a teenager, all shapes, sizes and dimensions, some large enough to accommodate 15-story skyscrapers, some barely bigger than an igloo, housing moisture farmers and hermits. Musk bustled. Mona Lisa took it all in, from the 3-car elevated monorail, and felt a hint of sadness. She had thought things might have changed since she went into prison, that the world stopped at the notice of her absence. But nothing of that sort happened. The people kept living, kept moving on in their lives, even as hers was put on stasis for a planned 5 to 10 years. Out in 3 with good behaviour, or just a couple of days with bad. Bat was up before the shuttle car stopped, and had her at the doors as they whisked open. She wondered why he didn't have her in handcuffs, then realised he wouldn't need them. She was never more than half a step away from him. It was a weird dynamic, because even though she felt she was leading, he was the one doing the steering. Little touches on the elbow of her arm to indicate direction, a fist pressed into a small of her back if she slowed too much, navigating between the roadblocks of people who stopped to stare at her, men who smiled and women who glared. It was as if Bat anticipated their actions and adjusted their movements to slip in front of or behind and avoid the knots of humanity altogether. Parts of her wanted to marvel at it. There was an element of athletic artistry, an almost poetic way they moved through the crowd. She wasn't sure how she knew, but if she bolted, he would catch her. She thought he might even grab her arm before she made it 2 steps, and that would draw more attention than she wanted. Better to wait for the right moment. Maybe in the shoulder-to-shoulder crowd in the bar he steered her into. "You know someone in here?" "I know lots of people in here." His eyes scanned the crowd. She watched a few scowls, a couple of glares, and more than a few bodies creeping towards other exits. "Mr. Popular." He squinted at a corner of the dark room. Mona Lisa tried to make out what he saw, but there was too many bodies blocking the view. The room was full of miners, workers, and assorted vendors selling drugs, sex, or both. She watched the room for how many might be working for Buster, but didn't recognize any faces. This far down the chain, they would be so removed from him, they might not even know who they worked for. Still, it paid to be careful. "Come on," Bat ordered. He didn't wait for her to follow. Just did that thing where he steered her forward just by his sheer presence, as if he displaced the air around her and moved her on the wake. Bat stepped aside and slid her into the booth across from a soot-streaked and tattered scarecrow of a man. He may have been handsome once, but a downhill slide into whatever liquid currently resided in a glass between his hands and turning him sour from inside out. His face was lined with crow's feet and creases at his lips from 1,000 smiles. Shaggy hair, limp and oily, framed a narrow face. His eyes were ice blue, and watched in hypnotic wonder at the creature who slid in the bench across from him. "This must be my luckiest day." "It is," Bat answered, and snapped his attention off Mona Lisa. The guard slid a communicator across the tabletop and swiped the screen open for the man to see. "We're looking for a pilot," Bat told him. The man sat up straighter in the booth and blinked his eyes 3 times at the glowing screen in front of him. "That's a lot of credit for a pilot." "Cop," he answered. "I'm not a cop." The pilot sniffed the air in an exaggerated fashion. "Works like a pig, talks like a pig, smells like bacon. I don't guess frog." He sniffed again. "Cop, take my word on it." The pilot guffawed and pounded the table with his fist, spilling his drink. A barmaid shuffled up to the edge of the table and shouted over the noise of the crowd. "What will it be?" "We're leaving in a minute," Bat told her. "Too late," she said. "You've already attracted too much attention." She pointed towards the far side of the bar. Mona Lisa yelped as she finally recognized someone. Not just anyone either, but one of Buster's top hired guns. She knew him as the Iceman, but not for any sinister reason. The man just liked to watch Top Gun and rooted for the wrong hero. "The Iceman cometh," she said in a soft voice. "He's not the only one." The pilot leered at her. The Iceman began shoving his way through the crowd. "This is trouble," Mona Lisa said to Bat. He grunted and slid the communicator back across the table. The pilot made a half-hearted swipe for it, missed, and tipped his drink all over the floor in a puddle that spread in front of the table. "Mama never told me about nothing like you." He slurred and stood up, avoiding the puddle and giving Bat a little space. "What's the job, cop?" "He's not a cop," Mona Lisa said before Bat could answer. "Trust me." "I'd trust you with my life," the pilot smiled, "and my heart too, if you want it. I'll even throw in all my body you can handle for free." He wiggled it just a little bit, and Mona Lisa bit back a sneer. Bat let Mona Lisa out of the booth and corralled her over the puddle, putting it in between him and the approaching muscle man. "Your fiancé hires guys with very bad reputations." "Ex," she corrected, "and yes, he's not a very nice man." Iceman overheard the last comment as he got closer and pretended to pout. "Mona Lisa, love, you hurt my feelings. I've always been nice to you." "This doesn't concern you," Bat warned him. "Move along." Iceman fixed a look on him and wrinkled his nose. "A cop in here?" "I'm not a cop," Bat corrected. "He's not a cop," the pilot added. "Tinker, I thought you were a Pole." Iceman noticed the square crow man for the first time. "How do you know?" Because he told me, the pilot said. Cops have to identify themselves if you ask. It's the law. That true, copper? Iceman glared at Bat. You supposed to identify yourself if someone asks you? I don't know the law. That sounds like a cop lie to me. Cops do lie, you know, all the time. Mona Lisa, how do you know if a cop's lying to you? He tilted his head and peered at her. Their lips are moving. Iceman whipped a blocky black pistol out of his waistband and lifted it to aim. Bat reached out, grabbed the gun with the hand in it, and in one smooth motion yanked the man forward and twisted the pistol out of his grip. The hired gun stumbled into the liquid on the floor. His feet slid out to either side in one slick motion and popped him ass deep in alcohol. Before anyone could move, before they could breathe, Bat slipped a taser pistol from the holster and shot the prongs into Iceman's chest. No one touched him as the body twitched and twanged in the puddle, the white colour turning a pale shade of yellow as Bat made the man pee himself. Gross, Tinker said, stepping back as the puddle spread. How much did you drink? Bat holstered the taser, hidden under his shirt, and secreted the pistol next to it. Aren't projectile weapons illegal on Mars? Tinker followed them as Bat led Mona Lisa from the bar. A real cop would have arrested him. Or shot him. Mona Lisa struggled to keep up. Yeah, you know who that was, right? Mona Lisa nodded as they reached the walkway outside the bar. And since you let him live, they're going to think I'm with you, Tinker mused. He did not look happy about his musing. How much were we offering again? I'm suddenly finding myself in need of being elsewhere. Show us your ship, said Bat. Show me the money. But Bat didn't blink, and after a minute, Tinker led them away from the bar, muttering under his breath. It gets worse, Mona Lisa said to the side of Bat's face. Now Buster knows I'm out. Chapter 5. The door to the hold trundled open with a swish sound. Ta-da! Tinker presented the inside with a wave of his hand. What a piece of shit, Mona Lisa tried not to gag. Trust me, she's got it where it counts. He brushed past her and went to the blocky shuttle that looked like an elongated beetle. Carbon streaks scarred its flanks from previous encounters with rockets. It wasn't an overly large ship. A hold in front of engines, a bulbous cockpit on the front end, rounded on the corners instead of being blocky. The hull was streaked and scored with pits and dings, soot, grime, and what looked like mud covering it in streaks. Strategically across identifying numbers, Bat noted. Metal patches of varied colours were welded to the hull. Tinker worked a panel that opened the door and started the engine at the same time. A roar filled the port dock and settled into a coughing rumble. Mona Lisa was used to luxury space yachts, not rehabilitated garbage scours, engines that purred instead of puttered. Smoke poured from the wide stern portals almost faster than the air scrubbers could keep up with. Are you seeing this? She asked Bat. My only job is to watch you. We're going to die in this thing. Probably not, Tinker called from the misty cloud clinging to the bottom of the loading ramp like a fog. I made this run hundreds of times. It shows, she sneered. This isn't going to work. I've changed my mind. Take me back to my cell. All right. Bat sneaked out a hand and snagged a wrist. He spun around and zip-tied one hand before she could draw a breath to protest. Wait, she squirmed. You said probably not, right? You did say probably not? Her eyes searched for Tinker in the fog and smoke. I did say probably. His disembodied voice answered. See, she explained. Probably. That means we've got a chance. But if Buster blows up that power station, then we'll all definitely die. That's what the warden said. Bat didn't answer, but he did let her go. She held up her wrist to expose the still attached zip tie. Bat reached out and snipped off the end with a platinum multi-tool. You clipped the wrong part, she winked at him. Still nothing. That's a reminder, he told her, in case you decide to run. All aboard, Tinker called out. Mona Lisa glared at Bat and climbed aboard the small ship. Run, she huffed. We're in space. Where am I going to go? Chapter 6. Let me give you the grand tour. Tinker ushered them into the hold of the ship. This is it. Bat let his eyes rove over the interior. It was a mess. The rear wall had one long bench, covered in discarded clothes, papers, books, and empty food cartons. There was a closed door at the rear, and a second pass-through at the front that was open to the cockpit. Mona Lisa strutted to the front and tried to hold back a gag as she sniffed the air. What's back there? Bat pointed to the closed door. Captain's quarters. Let me see. A man is entitled to his privacy, said Tinker. Bat slipped a communicator out of his pocket. What you got there? The pilot asked. Credit slip for the job. For me. He held out his hand, palm up, the universal sign for gimme. Open that door. Tinker dropped his hand and scowled. That wasn't part of the deal. I made the deal, said Bat. I can break it. Let's not rush to a decision now, Tinker backpedaled. His voice moved across the octaves from scratchy low to an almost feminine high pitch, depending on his sentences. Bat noted the twitches. Twitching hands that never stay still, nervous shifting from foot to foot, eyes that moved all over him, to Mona Lisa, to the door at the back, and did the circuit again in a loop. A man with something to hide. Door. Do you think the whole tough guy act is going to work on me? It would be bravery from another man. It sounded brave from the pilot. Voice pitched low, aggressive and cocky. The feet gave him away, still shifting. The eyes gave him away, still roving. A serious man would be itching for a fight and preparing, going still, eyes wide to take in more of the surroundings, maybe a move to put his back against the hull of the hold, so that there was no worries about an attack from that direction. Feet planted, one slightly beyond the other to prepare for a rush or a swivel, depending on the aggressor's approach, like Bat was now. The silent treatment doesn't scare me, Tinker continued, still talking, wasting breath, chest falling and rising faster. Not good with tension, with stress, thought Bat. Then why was he a pilot, a smuggler no less? The runs weren't well patrolled, but there was always a risk. Getting caught meant a prison cell on Mars, and Tinker did not seem like a man who would do well in prison. The twitching would bother someone, and they would make him stop. Permanently. Bat stared at him, waiting. Tinker's head swiveled, making the loop again and stopping to rest on Mona Lisa, who watched them with a calculated look on her features. Does he scare you, gorgeous? The pilot's swivelling eyes travelled up and down her trim form in the tight jumpsuit. On most people, it would be shapeless, formless, but on her it was skin tight, like some fashion designer created it specifically for her shape. It wasn't possible, but Bat supposed some people would like that. She used it as a distraction. He knew it. She knew it. The pilot didn't. She shrugged. He doesn't scare me. Tinker kept talking, his tongue joining the circus now, travelling across his lips, hands twitching. The quiet tough guy stuff may work in prison, but out here in the real world. Let's go in, mate. The pilot jumped. Mona Lisa jumped. Bat's voice startled them both, but she growled. Move, he ordered. She sulked towards the still open airlock hatchway. Bloody hell! Tinker stomped across the decking. The bottoms of his magnetised boots click-clacked along the way. He keyed in a code on the panel next to the hatch, and the tiny door at the rear of the compartment slid open. Satisfied? He stepped back and shoved his hand into the deep pockets of his grimy coveralls. Bat leaned in the doorway. It's a swamp. Like it? The small cubby hole had a bunk, a metal desk, and looked like a trash heap exploded in the cramped interior. Every space was covered with debris, the leavings of a man who thrived in chaos. I've got a system, Tinker said over his shoulder. Is that a... And a still, the pilot interrupted the guard. Anyone fancy a drink? Chapter 7. Mona Lisa tried to escape the stench, the smell of sweat and hooch and sour odour of alcohol seeping through someone's pores. There were supposed to be air scrubbers inside the ship too, all required by codes and standards, laws, rules, which this pilot didn't seem to give a damn about. She snorted. The exact reason they picked him, an outlaw, someone who slid under the radar and flouted rules. Like her, she thought as she peered into the shallow lower level of the cockpit. The guard was the only one who followed rules, a stickler, with a stick up his dark side. So far up, she wondered who was working the trigger to make him talk, because she did not trust him. Buster could buy and sell guards like cattle. He had told her once, after a fumbled attempt at drunk love-making, that all men had a price. It was his job to find it. He meant leverage. He meant pressure. Sometimes it was money. Sometimes it was family. All it took was a man willing to do what was needed to get what they wanted, like putting up with pawning or humping, the leering, and being owned, possessed, a trade. He got her body, her dignity, a piece of her soul, and Mona Lisa O'Neill got to live like a queen. So the guard ought to be bought. She knew that without a doubt. No matter how stern he was, how in line and buttoned up, he was for sale, just as every man was, and Buster had bought him, maybe, except he had a chance to kill her on the way from the prison, an escape attempt, an inquiry, and no one would know the wiser. Then he would leave the prison to deal with the trauma and disappear to one of the outer colonies with his money. But he didn't. She glanced over her shoulder at him. "Stop staring at me, inmate." "You don't need to be so rude," she snapped back. Lane come back, she thought. The quarters were too tight for an all-out yell-fest. She stepped down into the cockpit. It was narrow and tight, 4 seats in a half-diamond pattern, the seat on the left, slightly forward of the others. A sweat-stained yoke rested in front of it, old-fashioned for this model but fitting, the pilot seat. She settled in the one next to it, too close for her personal taste. She would have to breathe through her mouth until she could manipulate him into the shower to wash off the clinging miasma. Bat settled in the seat behind her. She could see his eyes reflected in the dark view screen. He was staring at the back of her jet-black hair. Mona Lisa didn't care. Men had stared at her for years, sometimes with open mouths, sometimes with open intent. It was normal for her, but the guard didn't stare at her like that. Not like someone he wanted to possess, something he wanted to put his dick in. His eyes were hooded, his face impassive, watching her like she was a responsibility and nothing else. She didn't like it, too far out of her zone of reference. Her mother had stared at her like that, but with love instead of palpable indifference. She squeezed her arms together and shivered. "We have an empty seat." Bat shrugged. "Don't ignore me," she said to the face reflected in the view screen. It was easier than turning around. "We could have brought an extra person, someone better trained than the security guard." Her eyes never left his face as she talked. "A soldier, someone who could protect us. You don't know who you're going up against." "Nope," said the pilot as he squeezed past Bat and settled behind the yoke. "That's Bob's seat." His fingers began moving against the buttons and keys as he worked through the pre-flight and got clearance from Mars ground control for a launch. One hand went up and he wiped the corner of his eye. "Are you crying?" asked Mona Lisa. "Who's Bob?" "Bob was my co-pilot." "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "It was a cat," said Bat. Tinker stopped and stared over his shoulder at the guard. "How did you know that?" Bat aimed a thumb back at the hold. "Litter box, fuzzy mouse toy, empty food bowl, smells like cat." "He was my co-pilot," Tinker snapped. 17 years by my side. He made every run on this trip since we started." He sniffed and pawed at the top of his nose. "Sorry," Mona Lisa offered. Tinker fought back the waterworks, studiously avoiding the empty seat in the cockpit. 17 years is old for a cat," she said. She smiled across the narrow seat and patted him on the arm. Tinker shot her a grateful smile. "She's playing you," Bat observed. "Can't a girl be nice?" "A girl, yes, not you." "What's your problem, asshole?" she hissed. "Do your job, inmate. Be quiet and leave the pilot to do his." Mona Lisa crossed her arms again, which did interesting things to her chest in the flight suit. Tinker watched in fascination until Bat cleared his throat and put him back on task. "What'd you call it?" "Bob." His name was Bob. "You named the ship and the cat the same thing?" "No, the cat is Bob." "Was Bob," said Bat. Tinker glared but did not turn round. "The ship?" Mona Lisa steered him back to the question. "Her." "It's a she. How can you tell?" All ships are female. That's sexist, Mona Lisa complained. It's not sexist, it's sexy. Then why didn't you name it? Her. 'Cause her name is a unique identity and it has to match the ship's personality. You should call it Shit Heap, Bat offered from the navigator's seat. Careful, Tinker petted the console. She'll hear you. What do you call her if you don't have a name for her? NS-17, he said with pride. Those aren't the numbers painted on the hull. It means not suitable for anyone under 17. What's that mean? It means it's dirty, said Mona Lisa. Right? Tinker wiggled his bushy eyebrows. All the way. Gross, she said. Bat snorted from behind them. We'll work on a better name, she told them. And since it's 2 on 1, remember to put the seat down on the toilet. 2 on 1? Could be fun. Tinker glanced out of the corner of his eye. You know I could kill you, right? Yeah, but what a way to go. Chapter 8. How are we going to find him? She asked. It was the first thing she said since the ship took off from Mars. Her word hung in the recycled air for a moment. That's your job, said Bat. He knew she was playing dumb, and she knew that he knew. It might have worked on another guard, an alternative tactic where her cleavage had failed, but not with Bat. I really have no idea, she lied. Of course, she had an idea. Her ex-fiancé was not a simpleton, but he was a simple man. If the shortest distance between 2 points was through a wall, that's how he would do it. Simple, straight, to the point. It made him very boring but efficient lover. It also made him predictable to those who knew him, which is why he made sure so few did. Except her. She knew. Knowing had almost got her killed. Twice. The first time when he realised she had figured him out, she barely escaped with her life. The second after she turned states against him. The attempt blew up a shuttle full of inmates and 6 guards, but not her. No, that time he missed again. There would be more, that much she knew, because she had also learned he did not give up. Boring? Certainly. Efficient? No doubt. And ruthlessly relentless. As soon as he learned she was out, he would turn loose the goons with terminate on sight instructions. Her only hope was to get to him first, and to do that, she would have to ditch the guard and steal the ship. Chapter 9. It was easy enough to think about escaping. It was potentially all she had done since they had put her in a cell on the Red Planet. Thinking was all that she could do there. Dig a tunnel, steal a rocket, fly away, or seduce a guard, stow away in his bunk on a recreation trip back to Earth, planning how she could do it, thinking about how she would do it, but never doing. And now she was out in a ship only outnumbered 2 to 1. She glanced at the lanky Grease Street pilot and let out a low chuckle. Something about me tickles you, princess? Tinker wiggled his eyebrows. Or do you want it too? If you're lucky. She gave an exaggerated sigh that drew his eyes exactly where she planned, until Bat spoke. Nobody is getting lucky. Focus on the mission. Tinker muttered under his breath, but neither of them could make out what he said. We're going to need luck to find him, said Mona Lisa, so somebody better start rubbing a rabbit's foot. I've got one in my pocket if you want to get started. She ignored the pilot's words and instead watched his hands. There are 3 places he could be. We do not need to find him. We just need to get close enough for him to hear your voice, Bat reminded her. Don't remind me, she shuddered. Besides Earth, there are only 3 places he could go, said Tinker. I just said that. You said it like I had a bunch of places to choose from. Tinker keyed in a sequence and sat back. There are only 3. 3 big stations between here and Earth, but there are a couple hundred undocumented outposts. He held up 3 fingers to emphasise his point. Unless he's on Earth. He's not on Earth, Bat and Mona Lisa said in unison. Jinx, she said. How do you know? How do you know? She pulled up a knee to her chest and wrapped an arm around it. He's wanted by too many people there. A lot of people want him out here too, and the government. Yeah, but I mean real people. Russians, said Bat. Yeah, she shivered. He won't go back to Earth. He'll avoid the lunar base too, said Bat. Lots of Russians there. Then that leaves one place to start, Tinker said. His fingers keyed in a sequence on the console and the engine hum ratcheted up a couple of notches. Is it supposed to sound like that? The pilot nodded and smirked. Not much experience up here, hun. She shook her head. I can help you with that, you know. He winked. 10,000 mile club. What's that? She really meant it, and it threw Tinker off. Never mind, he sputtered. Bat sniggered from the seat behind him. It's going to be a couple of hours, said the pilot, as he squeezed out of his seat and passed the guard. I'm going to have a drink. He didn't offer for anyone to join him. Chapter 10. Everything that goes to Mars goes through her. Tinker stared through the view screen at the floating behemoth that stretched for miles into the darkness. Bronson Station. It was a collection of metal constructs of every shape, welded and seamed together to form new shapes and configurations. You won't find an uglier place in space, Tinker finished. He prepared the docking sequence to queue up for a slot in one of the holds. Mona Lisa watched him and tried to memorize each step. Why don't we broadcast from here? Bat studied her face and noticed the intense interest. We could, said Tinker, but since we don't know direction or distance, it would be like yelling in the middle of a cave. He might pick up a radio signal, but the chances are low. He wiped a grimy hand across his face and left a trail of grease on his cheek. It's a lot of ground to cover, Bat grumbled. He couldn't hide the worry in his voice. Most of it's warehouse and space dock, Tinker offered helpfully. It still leaves a couple of 100 places to check, though. The ship engaged the autopilot and began the docking sequence. You do that well, Mona Lisa said. This old girl practically fires herself. The lights flickered twice and died. Tinker never lost his grin. He just rapped his knuckles against the control panel and they flared into brilliance again. You just have to know how to say please. A holding clamp swooped down and nested into the airlock of the NS-17. The umbilical stretched across and attached to the hull of the ship to create an artificial airtight seal. Tinker turned in his seat to study Bat and Mona Lisa. All right, he said. Have you been here before? Of course, she sneered. Have you been here without your boyfriend? Fiancé, she corrected. Ex. Right, so you're on the market. Can we just focus? Background. You? Tinker shook his head. What about me? They're going to peg you as a cop the minute you step through the hull. I am not a cop. Same thing. Bacon is as bacon does. I am a bodyguard. And what a body it is. He eyed Mona Lisa. But it doesn't matter. Having you around is going to get us killed, or worse. What's worse than being killed? Tortured, mutilated, raped, gang raped, tickle fights, slap fights, and a really awful karaoke bar the Japanese started on level 5? He ticked off on his fingers. She's not going on the station without me. We're just looking for information, right? Asked Tinker. I can watch her. No. Look, you're being unreasonable. No. You keep saying no, but that doesn't change the fact. There are no facts. She does not leave my sight, ever, Bat stated. It sounded final. What about if I have to go to the bathroom? She said. I'll escort you to the door. What a gentleman. Her lip curled. Tinker studied him for a minute. Look, I've got some overalls in a locker that might fit, but you don't look like a pilot or crew. You look like a cop. Let me worry about it. He shot back. I will let you worry about it, but I'm going to worry about it because if shit goes sideways in there, it could rain down on me. Mona Lisa giggled. You think that's funny? Raining crap is funny. Not when it's coming down on you. But it is when it's you. Let's agree to avoid said shitstorms, said Bat. Quick in and out. The only way I know how, said Tinker. Then he noticed the look on Mona Lisa's face. Wait, I mean... She knows what you mean. Bat grabbed him by the scruff of his jumpsuit and steered him backwards towards the narrow hold of the ship. Get the overalls. You should have let me rag on him. I'm willing to bet you get more than one more chance. Chapter 11. There was no one to greet them on the other side of the airlock after it whisked open. Strange, said Bat. Not really. Tinker pushed past him and led them through the narrow umbilical to the second hatch on the inside. He cycled through the loading sequence with deft taps of his fingertips. You're thinking like a prison guard. You have to meet the prisoner when they're off-boarding. Here, we're just another ship in for a supply run. Tinker took another look at Bat in the grease-stained brown overalls. They were too short on his tall frame, riding high on combat boots. The sleeves he could disguise by rolling them over his muscled forearms, but there wasn't anything they could do about the way he stood, the way he carried himself. He just didn't look like a trader. You still look like a soldier, the pilot complained. I'm not a soldier, Bat said quickly. Fast enough, Mona Lisa arched an eyebrow and peered at him from the side of her eye. I said you look like a soldier. Tinker grabbed the lever that unlocked the seal of the hatch once the computer beeped and all clear. Bat tried to slouch. That just makes it worse. I'm slouching. Yeah, but now you look like a guy trying to not look like a soldier. Bat sighed and shrugged and stood up straight. They'll have to deal with it. We're going to get info, get a radio call out, and stop your boyfriend from destroying Mars. Fiancé, she corrected. Ex. You keep saying ex like it mattered to me that you were engaged. Tinker smiled and ushered her through the door. Ladies always go first. Gross. She pushed past him. Bat knocked him aside to keep up with her. Relax, said Tinker as he regained his balance and stepped in with them. This is a triple lock. It's on all ship docks. They work in sync, so two can never be open at the same time. What happens if they were? Tinker crumbled his fist together and made a whooshing sound. They thought about it when they designed her, though. Each deck has a flood compartment, so if there's a breach in the hull, it locks down that section until they can get a crew to repair it. Bat nodded as he studied the struts on the inside of the airlock while Tinker opened the interior hatch. He knew the station was old, at least 40 years in service, maybe longer, and no government had authorised a budget for improvements since it was built. By the looks of it, there wasn't much budget for maintenance either. Grime covered everything, a gritty grey soot-like substance that turned the once bright sheen of metal into a dull slab of drab colour. It covered the walls, it painted the ceilings. Everything was dulled by a layer of grit and grime, except the centre of the floor, scrubbed clean by the passage of thousands of footsteps. Do you know where to start in here? Tinker asked both of them. Bat stared at Mona Lisa, drilling holes into the back of her skull as she considered the question. I know, she said. Are you going to share? Bat asked after a moment. I could tell you, and you could leave me safe on the ship, she offered. You could even stay with me and send him out alone. She watched him consider it, watched a tug-of-war of emotions flit across his eyes. He worked hard to keep an emotionless mask, but she knew from Buster to watch the skin around the eyes. Everyone had a tell. Bat's poker face was one of the best she'd ever seen, just not enough to fool her. He wanted to stay too. Not with her, though if she did, she could turn that to her advantage. No, this was something different. Bat was scared. Not a tremble in your boots kind of afraid, but fear nonetheless. Mona Lisa almost said something. She wanted to see his reaction to her noticing, but she kept it quiet, another weapon to use in her arsenal when the time came. No one is staying behind, he told her. She nodded. Then Tinker had the door open, and inside sounded like hell. Chapter 12. Is that an organ? A pipe organ, said Tinker. Been here forever. A series of pipes was tucked in the corner of a cubby next to a hold that had been transformed into a makeshift bar. Bat could tell it was a bar because there were two 16-foot planks rested on wooden crates that separated a row of liquor stock shelves from the rest of the crowded room. It smelled of unwashed bodies and cheap alcohol, cologne and BO, and the bubbling scent of sauerkraut that tainted the air. "I'm hungry," said Tinker. "We'll eat back at the ship." "All I've got are stale MREs back there." Bat glanced around the room, eyes travelling over the traders, grifters, smugglers, and assorted nationalities that ended up calling the space station home. "Drifters," he muttered. He would know. He was something of one himself. Mona Lisa overheard him, but didn't comment on it. Her eyes travelled around too. She would know someone in here, she was sure. The question was, would that someone want to kill her, or help her? Before she went to prison, she had a fuller figure, and showed it off with as little as whatever was fashionable at a time as she could get away with without being called a hooker. The cell life had stripped her of £20, the product that coiffed her hair, and the makeup that created an iridescent look few could match or master, but she still was attractive. Still Mona Lisa O'Neill, paramour and paragon of one of the most notorious gangsters in the galaxy. Someone was bound to recognise her. She just didn't expect it when they did. "The owner got this on Earth," Tinker was saying as he displayed the organ with one hand. "You bitch!" A girl's voice, rough from whiskey and maybe tears, came from behind them. A slender hand and manicured nails grabbed Mona Lisa by the shoulder, ripped her around and punched her with a crack across the jaw. The angle was weird. The punch thrower was a short woman, barely 5 feet tall, and fiery red hair, and apparently a violent disposition toward conflict resolution. Bat stepped between the demure rager and Mona Lisa, partially to protect her and partially to keep her from retaliating. They didn't need more eyes on them. The little woman lost her mind. At least this was how it seemed to him. He reached out a long thick arm to hold her back, and it was like tossing a wolverine a steak bone. She growled, whirred, and lashed into him with sharp-tipped nails and boot-cladded feet. He tried to catch his breath, but she kicked him in the nuts, and there was no more wind, only the stars and the sound of her voice screeching in a dog-pitched wail. Or maybe that was him. He caught sight of Tinker wincing as he dropped to both knees, damaged bits clenching tightly between 2 hands. Mona Lisa was on her own. She should have run, but someone sucker-punched her. Her Irish heritage made her quick to temper, and her Italian heritage made her ravenous for revenge. Those two things that combined to make her ferociously beautiful also worked to make her a hot-headed dealer of pain, suffering, and retribution. She kicked the girl in the stomach. "You friggin' dwarf!" Spittle flung from her mouth as she delivered a roundhouse punch. "You want to mess with me?" Another kick. "You want to fuck with me?" The third punch sent the girl crashing to the floor in a slobbering heap, quivering under a rain of jabs, hammer blows, and boot drops. Tinker grabbed her around the waist and hustled her away from the spreading pool of blood on the metal floor plates. He bent over and scooped Bat up by the belt, and they staggered towards the door. "We've got to move," he said. "Too late." Bat gasped, both hands cradling the still tender section of his emasculation. Tinker dropped Mona Lisa as she spluttered like a cat in a bathtub. "Damn," he said. She turned around and recognised someone she knew. "Damn," she agreed. "This is not going to end well." Chapter 13. "Hello, hello, hello," said a one-eyed man with a wrinkled face as he stood in the doorway. "What have we here?" "Hello, Ian," Mona Lisa sighed. "Bonjour, love." A smile crinkled his face, but didn't touch his cold blue eyes. "Long time no see." He pointed to the silk patch that covered his left eye. Someone had embroidered the all-seeing eye from the back of the US dollar bill onto the patch, in brilliant green, thread faded from time. "It's good to see you," said Mona Lisa. She adopted a pose that thrust one hip out and forward, pressed her magnificent chest in his direction. "I wish I could say the same, love." His accent was clipped British Cockney, but muted by a long stint at the International Space Hub. "Why have they got you all covered up? It's like a drape over the Mona Lisa. The original." He winked. "Just working from a passage," she said. "Part of the crew." Ian's one blue eye travelled up from the tip of her boot toes, up the flight suit, and rested on her ornamented face. He sneered. "Not bloody likely, love." Bat watched his hand snake towards a blade he carried on his belt. Projectile weapons were not allowed on the space hub, for the sheer likelihood they would punch through the body being shot and punch out a hole in the wall. On Earth, a bullet hole was an ornamentation, just a hole in metal, unless some poor unfortunate was on the other side of said metal when the bullet passed through. Up here, it was something different entirely. A pin-sized hole could create a vacuum strong enough to suck a 200-pound man into a wall and slowly leak him through, like spewing guts into a frozen void of space. Bullet holes would do the same, but much faster, and with more victims until a repair crew could slap a patch on the outside, or an enterprising soul fought down panic enough to put something solid against the puncture. That's why security forces carried tasers. "Friends of yours?" he asked Mona Lisa. "Piss off, Ian. What concern is it of yours?" She shrugged. Pat was a large man, but she had never seen him outside of interaction with female prisoners. Size didn't matter. Ian was a known commodity. He was mean, tough, tested. A small smuggling warlord with a reputation for cruelty she knew was well earned, and he had a knife. He had lost his eye in a knife fight. Scars across his knuckles and hands like a map of pale purple lines that criss-crossed in no discernible pattern. "The lady is with me," said Bat. "I know Mona Lisa," Ian answered in a voice as low as the guard's, "and she ain't no lady." He flicked open the knife in a fast snake-like motion, the snick of the blade audible over the noise of the crowd gathering round to watch the conflict. Bat tased him. The blunt, blocky taser was shaped like a thick gun and carried in a small holster on his waist, hidden by the folds of the coveralls. Hidden so well Mona Lisa hadn't known he had it, neither did Tinker, which is why the pilot shrieked as the two lines popped into the Brit standing next to him and sent him into the ground in a macabre dance. His body skittered on the floor, feet tapping out a funky beat as his muscles contracted and convulsed. Ian moaned, he groaned. Bat shot him with another couple 1,000 volts until he passed out in a puddle of piss and drool. He detached the plastic deployed blasting cap and dropped the two wires onto the still twitching body. "Anyone else want to talk about it?" He addressed the crowd as he slapped a new charge into the barrel of his weapon. No one else felt like talking. Chapter 14. "That was a bad idea," Mona Lisa said as she struggled to breathe. Bat hurried them down the corridor, packed like a bazaar that wouldn't look out of place in China or the Middle East. Noise chased them as vendors hawked their wares. "Do you know who that was?" "Guy with a knife." "He owns this sector." Tinker watched over their shoulder as they hustled deeper into the bowels of the space station. "We have to go through here to get back to my ship." Bat bullied them through an aggressive row of stall-keepers. The volume of chatter rose to shrieks as the robe-turbaned and silk pyjama-wearing men cursed and yelled. "They don't like you much," Mona Lisa huffled. "I don't care." "I don't like you very much either." He shot her a look and didn't see the fist sail out from behind two vendors and clock him across his cheek. Bat dropped, cursing. A large man shoved the vendors aside and stood astride the guard. "Mr. Ian wants to see you." His gravelly voice rumbled. Bat drew back his boot and launched an upward kick straight between the man's legs. The mass of flesh ploughed into the deck beside him, puking and mellowing. Bat used him to stand up and delivered a second kick across his jaw. A blow shut him up, but now they would hear more noise over the already eardrum-bursting volume of the bazaar. More shrieks, shouts and screams tracked the progress of someone chasing after them. Several dozen someones by the sound of it. "We need to get out of here," No shit, said Tinker, eyes popping in panic. I may know a place. The two men looked over to her. It might not be safe, she said. Safer than this? He motioned towards the wall of noise bearing down on them. She nodded, then shrugged. Lead the way, said Bat, but he kept a hand on the butt of a taser just in case. Chapter 15. Back on Earth, the world's tallest man came from the Mongol region of China. Han Su was 8 feet 8 inches and a legend among the locals. He attracted the attention of government officials in his teen years as a 7-foot-tall basketball prodigy. Word travelled up the chain of command to the communist leadership that Shu would be open to trade. Olympic gold and glory to China in exchange for a seat on the shuttle and a small shop in the Chinese section of a space hub. He continued to grow, broke records in the books of such things, brokered endorsements and contracts for his image, and retired at the age of 28 to live his fantasy as a spaceman. His daughter was just under 8 feet tall, and her son, with a man named Kim, was the same height as his grandfather. But young Kim, the great-grandson of the world's tallest man, grew up without the constraints of Earth gravity and edged the needle of 9 feet 1. Bat, Mona Lisa and Tinker were led into a hold converted to palliative living quarters, one of few sections of the station where the literal giant could stand up straight. Mr. Kim, Mona Lisa greeted him. He lounged in a cushioned chaise, 4 scantily clad women rubbing their fingertips over his skin, including one who kept her hand under his trousers in a slow undulating back and forth motion. Is she? Tinker whispered. Yes, Bat answered. Don't be rude, Mona Lisa chastised them. Then he stood up. He folded himself up on long legs as tall as Mona Lisa. It was like watching an insect move, skinny limbs stretching as he rose. He took a step forward, then another, scowling. Bring me my glasses, he snapped. Tinker tried to ignore the protruding appendage that swayed under his loose, shiny pyjamas, stretching the fabric in a tent-like fashion large enough for him to stand under. Mona Lisa had it worse. Everything was eye level as he was closer to her. One of the concubines hopped off a large chaise and delivered the requested glasses. There are rules, he said, staring down at her. He was all long limbs, thin, stretching and possibly high, towering over them. Everything about him was giant. His neck was 8 inches and narrow, an apple-shaped head on top of a stick peering forward, long 9-inch fingers, a gift of his grandfather, a propensity to grip a basketball or someone's head. There are rules, he said again, as if she didn't hear him the first time. Mona Lisa nodded. I know. You broke the rules. He wasn't much of a mister. Bat thought he couldn't be more than 25, but a ganglord of this section of the station, a young prince of crime very used to getting his own way. Bat thought the thin pyjamas was part of an act to throw people off and put them on edge, the height of the women massaging him half naked on the lounge. Him standing waving his giant slice of manhood around, all an act designed to give him an edge until someone realised it was an act. Bat watched him. Watched the act. He knew most big guys were weak at the knees, literally. A quick sideways chop and a gigantic gangster would fold like a redwood chopped by a lumberjack. He knew that 2 of the guards were armed with short swords like ninjas used to carry, and surprise projectile weapons, a Glock 17 and a thicker Taurus. These men lived dangerously, or like the giant, they were for show. Either way, it was a problem. Kick the leader and the guards would swarm like hornets. He could handle one, but in tandem they could do some real damage. Bat planned it in his head, how he would do it. Tinker should help, if he could, but the pilot didn't seem like he would be good in a fight. He caught Bat staring and shrugged. Do you see the size of his junk? He mouthed the words. Mona Lisa had an eyeful, literally. She came to his waist, which put her in direct line of sight. All for show, Bat thought, all to throw them off. But why? What is the rule? Mr. Kim prompted. His English was excellent. tinged with the flavour of 100 other nationalities that mingled on board the space hub. "No rats," she answered. "Even up here the gangs had a code, especially up here. The code was clear. Don't talk to the authorities. Stay local to your crew. It was the same in prison." "And did you rat?" She kept quiet then, which was smart. Mr. Kim looked tense. The excitement going on in the front of his pants had all but disappeared, much to the relief of Tinker and Mona Lisa. Bat figured they had other things to worry about, worse things. "There are rumours afloat," Mr. Kim continued. "Rumours of a lover's betrayal." "Rumours are tricky things, Mr. Kim," said Mona Lisa. "I find the truth behind the rumours more complicated than the simple gossip betrayed." Mr. Kim motioned to a dark corner of the hold. A dozen men appeared. Bat tensed for combat. Or to die, really, since there wasn't much he could do if they decided to kill him. Maybe take one out, if they got close enough. But the men carried a table and chairs to the middle of the room and set it with an elegant tea service. Delicate porcelain cups were distributed around an ornate bronze pot. Steam wafted off the water within. "Join me for a drink." He sat in the largest chair and still towered over them. Mona Lisa took the seat closest to the giant, while Tinker and Bat sat in the other two. One of the women from the divan hopped up and served Mr. Kim first. Pouring the almost boiling water into the cups over loose tea leaves, she prepared tea for the others. Mr. Kim waited until they had tiny little cups in front of them, then lifted his own for a toast. "To friends, long absent," he said, eyes studying the woman next to him. "We are still friends, aren't we, Mona Lisa?" She nodded and sipped her tea. "Is there a story behind the rumours which you wish to share with your friend?" She shook her head now. His face was a poker mask, unreadable. Bat frowned. He couldn't get a feel for how things were going. Was the gangster angry? Was he just toying with them while men with swords snuck up behind them? He tried to glance around without being noticed. Mr. Kim did. "Introduce me to your friends." Mona Lisa took another sip to buy time, then again to buy more. "Tinker." The pilot held out his hand across the table. Mr. Kim looked at it as if the man proffered a fish. After a moment he reached over and shook it. "Would you look at the size of his mitt?" Tinker exclaimed. "Yes," Mr. Kim smiled. "Quite. A gift from my grandfather. They say genetics are key, you know." "Do they?" "I think they do. If they don't, they should." "And what do you do for my friend Mona Lisa, Tinker?" "I'm the pilot," Tinker grinned. "Yes, a pilot is a good way to get around space," said the gangster, as if there were other ways they weren't aware of yet. "And you?" His eyes turned to Bat and drilled into him. Bat leaned back in his chair. "You have not enjoyed the tea prepared for you," observed Mr. Kim. "My apologies," said Bat. "I didn't mean to be rude." He kept his other hand on the table as he lifted the glass to his lips and took a small sip. "It is green tea from my ancestral province. The industrial pollution has all but ruined that section of China, but the soil from deep in the ground is still fertile. My men dig it up and grow tea in a greenhouse." Bat sipped again to show his appreciation. This seemed to please Mr. Kim, who made a subtle motion to the girl preparing a second cup for the guard. "You have me at a disadvantage," said Mr. Kim. "I am sure Mona Lisa has shared my name with you, but you have not shared yours with me." "Bat." "Like the mammal?" Bat nodded. "An interesting name. We think a name says a lot about a person. I wonder what Bat says about you." Mr. Kim took a sip of his tea and stared over the edge of his glass. He held the small cup with one finger pressed against his thumb. It looked like a child's teacup in his grip. More of an act, thought Bat, all about making a certain impression. But the way he talked suggested he was an educated gangster. Another act of intimidation. "It is short for Bartholomew Marshall. My father called me Bat, and it carried over into my adult life." There it was. A reaction. No one knew who Bat Marshall was. Just some anonymous guard at a private prison on the edge of a colony on Mars. But a lot of people knew Bartholomew Marshall, or they thought they did. Bat figured they knew a lot of stories about the man he once was. Stories were different from life, though. Mr. Kim nodded and set the cup on the table. Bat tensed his muscles. This was it. An interesting choice of companions, my friend. He turned away from Bat and Tinker and focused on Mona Lisa. She nodded. Your silence says much. She took a sip of tea and nodded, spilling it down the front of her flight suit. She said, in a high-pitched voice. Then her hands were moving to wipe the liquid, lifting her bosom, unzipping the suit to reveal more cleavage. Mr. Kim chuckled. Impressive, he said. That must work on most men. Mona Lisa leaned forward to give him a better view and put her hand under her chin as she tilted her head. It was a practiced look, one designed to stir the blood and get her away. I'm here for a favour, she said. Of course you are, he answered. We are friends, but not that kind of friend, are we? I'm willing to trade for information. She squeezed her shoulders together a microfraction to give him an idea of what she had to barter. Mr. Kim gazed longingly at her for a moment, then lifted his eyes to meet hers and laughed out loud. I could take without permission, and you could not stop me, he said. I do not need to trade for anything. A tiny cup at the far end of the table crinkled as it cracked in Bat's fist and dropped onto the tabletop. Mr. Kim and Mona Lisa stopped looking at each other and stared at Bat. She is under my protection, Bat said in a soft voice. There will be no taking of anything. He could hear the guards rustle behind him as he locked eyes with the gangster. The moment stretched out. Hours, maybe, each man taking a measure of each other. That is not what friends do, he said. Thank you for reminding me of my obligation as your host, Mr. Marshall. Bat, indeed. I do not want what you currently offer. He motioned to the display of flesh on the divan. But I do have a need you may satisfy. He glanced at Tinker. I'm flattered, bud, but I don't play for that team. Mr. Kim laughed again. Your companions are a delight, Mona Lisa. I am glad you returned at such a fortuitous time for both of us. No, Mr. Tinker, I am in need of a pilot. You want to fly somewhere? No, said the gangster. I want you to fly somewhere. Chapter 16. He didn't ask what you wanted, Tinker said as they stalked through the corridor. He knows what I want, she huffed. He just doesn't know why. He thinks I want to finish what I started. Not with me around, said Bat. Yeah, what was that whole Bartholomew Marshall thing? Are you somebody special? Bat shook his head. Just a prison guard. Now, said Mona Lisa, eyeballing him as they hurried towards the ship. But what were you before? Aren't you afraid we'll run into your British friend? She stopped in her tracks. Tinker ran into the back of her, bounced off as he struggled to maintain his balance and knocked into a cart that overturned into a crowd in front of them. Yes, she said, and nodded forward. Ian stood 10 yards ahead of them, waiting, glaring at Bat. He does not look happy, she said. Tinker extracted himself from the mess he made and backed away from the pouring hands of the vendors as she shrieked at him. He bumped into another cart, tripped and tipped it over to join the first. Are you drunk? Bat asked. Just clumsy, said the pilot as he climbed to his feet. But the mess brought a crowd that poured through the fallen wares. The cart owners did double time trying to keep anyone from running off without paying. It also served as an enormous noisy distraction with the advantage of putting dozens of bodies between them. This way, said Bat. He yanked Mona Lisa by the arm behind a bellowing veil that separated the carts from each other. She snagged Tinker as he pulled her along. He's going to see us back here, Tinker whispered. Louder, said Mona Lisa. I don't think he heard you. He's going to, Tinker said. She elbowed him in the stomach and earned silence for an effort. Be quiet. I thought you couldn't hear me." "Everyone can hear you." "Both of you, shut up," Bat hissed. It led them beyond the stall, sneaking from one covered wall to the next until they were well past the gang of toughs lying in wait for them. He watched as Ian directed his thugs to spread out and search for them behind the crowd. They would look behind the stalls eventually and see them. But they had time to move, just a few moments to get someplace else and beyond their view. Mona Lisa noticed and put it together. She moved past Bat and continued to lead them further away from the madness and back to the ship. Back at the ship, she stood a Tinker as he keyed in the airlock opening code. Then even closer, as he prepared for launch. Bat watched her, watch him. "I can't believe we're doing this." Tinker went through his mental checklist. "Yet here we go. It's a affiliate in space," he continued complaining. So they hate you, they hate me, and they're really going to hate her." He rooted around under his seat and pulled out a bottle of clear liquid. He unscrewed the top and took a drink. "I know a guy," Mona Lisa said. "How do you know a guy?" "Don't worry about it. It's business." "Excuse me if I don't worry about it." Tinker took 2 more long swigs of hooch. "It's my ass on the line." "What kind of business?" asked Bat. Mona Lisa unzipped the top of her flight suit under the careful watch of Tinker, who stopped his flask half raised to his lips. "Islamists are just like every other religious nut," she explained. "Out in public, they're all off with their heads and stone us back to the Dark Ages. But behind closed doors, it's space boats and hoes." "It's a big ship," said Bat. "How are you going to find one guy?" "Don't worry, he'll find me." Chapter 17. The Saracen was an incredible amalgamation of derelict ships melded together to form a free-floating work of art in outer space. There were thousands of them, different shapes and sizes, making models and configurations to maximize occupancy efficiency and minimize explosive decompression. Even as they watched on the view screen, atmosphere hissed out of one of the construct, and a steady stream of escaping air that created a slow spin that rotated the space station around. "Is that on purpose?" Mona Lisa asked. "I thought you knew a guy here." "I know a guy," she spouted. "I don't know the physics behind the place where he lives." "No," answered Tinker. "These ships are so old they are decomposing. The metal and welds are held together with bubblegum and duct tape, so the stress breaks them open." "That sounds bad." "It is," he said in a grim voice. "I mean, they're extremists, but it's not a pretty way to die. Basically, they're spewed into space." "What if your guy isn't here?" "He is." "But where?" "How much do you know about this place?" she asked. "I thought you didn't know the physics." "I know the history." "You're a history buff?" "No, I'm a good listener, especially when people are drinking." "You want to listen to me?" Tinker swigged. "Do I have a choice?" He waggled his eyebrows and leered. "They rounded up all the extremists they could find on Earth," she said, "and shipped them off here so they could have their own Islamic state." "In space?" "In space," she nodded. "Only no one wanted to pay for it, and there was no oil money left to cover the bill, so they got charity ships and a ride up here." "They built that?" "They were supposed to go to Mars, start a new colony, but like I said, no money. When the oil dried up, so did their power. But they have something Mr. Kim wants." Bat peered through the view screen. "You got an eye on where we can dock?" "I need the radio first," she interrupted. "No radio." "We need to call in so I know how close to get us. The Saracen is different. We can't just walk about in it." Chapter 18. Hassan Khan stared at the blinking light on top of his communication console and debated whether to answer it or not. He took a puff on a hand-rolled cigarette and waved the smoke towards a refurbished air scrubber that wheezed as it struggled to keep up with the tainted air. "What?" He finally reached out and pressed the button. He forgot about a cigarette when he saw who it was on the screen. "You've got a nerve." He sat up on a pillow on the floor and glared at the image. "Hello, Khan," Mona Lisa said in the static-laced radio. "It doesn't seem happy to see you." "It's not." Khan overheard them on the computer. "I'm not." "But he owes me a favour."
"I thought you went to prison."
"I got out," she answered.
"Not for good behaviour, I wager."
"We're on a mission from God," Tinker interjected. Bat and Mona Lisa gave him blank stares. "What? Nobody watches the classics?"
"Bruise Brothers."
Khan leaned forward until they could almost see up his large nose, made so much more by the close proximity of the screen.
"I love that flick."
"I saw the poster," said Tinker. "Me too." "Time," Bat reminded them. "Khan, as much as I'd like to discuss ancient film history, we're on a clock?"
"You have a copy on your ship."
"Of course, man." "I think he's just ignored you," Bat sniffed. "You don't have a monopoly on it." She tucked in her bottom lip.
"My holoprojector broke months ago," Khan explained. "Parts are difficult to come by."
"You already owe me," said Mona Lisa. "I just have the one," Tinker pouted. "Where's your honour?" she said to the screen.
"In a pile on the floor next to my holoprojector."
"Not my problem."
"Nor is yours mine."
"You're playing fast and loose with my stuff, lady," Tinker said. "Normally I'll make a woman buy me dinner before I let her do that to me."
"Who is this guy?"
Khan guffawed.
"Him I like."
"He's the guy who's going to give you a holoprojector for helping us."
"I am?"
"You are. Nobody said nothing about giving up my possessions. I've worked hard for that."
"Let it go," said Bat. "We'll get you another."
"It's got sentimental value." "He has porn on it," said Mona Lisa. "Those vids are private," Tinker snapped, "and artistic." Bat put his hand between them. "Strip the hard drive and give it to him. We don't have time to waste."
"Excellent, my friends."
Khan was all smiles.
"Welcome to the Saracen."
Chapter 19. Khan sent the coordinates to the ship berth. Tinker made deft manoeuvres to avoid the slow spin, line P-speed and trajectory of the NS-17 to the Saracen. He snaked the umbilical to connect the airlocks, and Khan met them the other side of the tube as they stepped through.
"Hurry!"
He rushed them to the dark corner.
"Put these on."
Mona Lisa gagged. "It stinks." The Saracen smelled like stale curry and unwashed bodies. A million smoked cigarettes with hints of depression and a sour reek of despair. Khan handed over 3 burkas and waited while they slithered them over their heads. "I'm not wearing a dress." Tinker held the black fabric away from him.
"It's the only way to hide your skin,"
Khan explained.
"or you'll be ripped to shreds before we reach my ship."
Tinker shrugged the long cloth over his head and slithered into the bellowing black cloth and struggled to adjust it so he could see through the lace-covered slit that hid his eyes. "Bloody hell," he groped. "This stinks almost as bad in here."
"Come,"
Khan beckoned.
"Stay 3 paces behind me."
He led them through a hold door into a cramped hallway. They could hear people, but no one was about. "What's the creaking?" Tinker asked, worried. They heard the sound of groaning metal, and it sounded almost human in the moaning wail that seemed to never stop.
"Quiet,"
Khan hissed, just as 3 robed men rounded the corner and stopped to glare at him. They spoke in rapid-fire Arabic, and Khan answered. The newcomers didn't acknowledge the 3 figures waiting a respectful distance away while the men conversed. After a moment, the talk was over, and the men stepped aside to let them pass. As they did, one of the robed warriors nudged his buddy and laughed as he nodded at the giant figure of Bat hidden under the robes. They rounded the corner and disappeared, chased by a few giggles. Khan wiped his sleeve across his brow and rushed them into his ship compartment. He sealed the door behind them.
"It's safe now,"
he said. The trio shred the robes and laid them next to the door within easy reach. Bat didn't look forward to going back under the cloth, but it was going to be necessary if they planned to complete the mission for Mr. Kim. At least he hoped that's how it would play out. They still needed to hurry. There was a love-torn man on the loose with a plan to destroy 1 million people just to kill the woman who betrayed him. Chapter 20. The inside of Khan's ship looked a lot like Tinker's, except for one exception. It was a large exception. A giant 8-foot view screen dominated one wall as they entered. It flipped from an artistic nude of Mona Lisa to a raunchy action image with Buster. Tinker pulled up short, mesmerised as it flipped back to the full-body view of her reclining on a couch. He nearly drooled over the second picture. "You son of a bitch!" "Oops," said Khan as he dug around for the remote to click the screen over to something more suitable for guests. It froze on an image of her, and Tinker took 2 steps closer to the wall. Mona Lisa took 2 steps too, towards Khan, and sent a pointed toe up between his shoulder blades, by way of his groin. He squeaked as something popped, threw up, and passed out. "That's not going to help," said Bat, unfazed by the pictures of his prisoner in the buff. "On the contrary," Tinker drawled, "this is helping quite a bit." It took 10 minutes to wake up Khan. Tinker tried shouting his name once, then giggled. "What?" asked the guard. "From the classic movie, you know, Khan." "No idea." "You don't know what that's from?" Bat shook his head. "That's insane, man. What did you watch growing up? Hell, that show is how we ended up in outer space, boldly doing new things." Bat shrugged again. "I swear." He turned to Mona Lisa for help. She stared at the blank view screen she managed to shut off after a brief struggle with Tinker to control the remote. "Don't look at me," she barked. "Love," the pilot said. "I don't think I'm ever going to be able to stop. You want to look like him?" She pointed to Khan as he squirmed back to consciousness on a threadbare rug on the decking. He rolled over and clutched his groin, moaned, and made it to his knees. "What did you do that for?" he managed to get out after several tries. She pointed towards the screen and waited for him to notice. "You said I owed you." His voice slowly returned to normal, even if he couldn't stand up straight. "I was showing you that you owed me too." "Where did you get those?" "I traded a guy," he told her. "Only known copies." "Does Buster know?" "I assumed he took them." "He did. I meant, does he know they're out here, with you?" Khan blanched and caught his breath. "That's what I thought. What would he do if he knew you had them?" Khan peeked at the tender spot between his legs. "I let you keep them," said Mona Lisa. "Now, how about the favour you owe me?" Chapter 21. Khan was an open book after the threat sank in. He shared everything he knew about the location of the item Mr. Kim had sent them to retrieve. Granted, it wasn't much more than the location of the ship where it was supposed to be, but on the vast expanse of the Saracen, that was enough. "How far do we have to walk in these things?" Tinker grumbled as he swung the cloth back and forth, walking next to Mona Lisa. She was tucked between Bat and the pilot as they stuck to the side of the corridor and tried not to hurry. Khan told them where it was located but refused to leave his berth. Bat insisted until her contact proved that walking would be difficult for him for quite some time. All he had in his future was bed rest and a bag of ice to slow the swelling. "All the way," Bat told them. It was a rhetorical question, the pilot complained. "Bloody hell. Tough being a woman on this thing," Mona Lisa observed. "We saw your preferred state of dress back in his bunk," Bat said out of the side of his mouth. She drew back a fist to punch him and stopped short when 3 of the sword-wielding guards rounded a corner and watched them. "No one talks about it ever again," she warned. "Talk? I never wanted to forget it. Just knowing you have the drive in your pocket makes me want to wrestle it off you, or just wrestle you." "Quiet," Bat hissed. They walked past the guard, heads bowed so their eyes were hidden. The ship berth they were searching for was less than 100 meters away. "Should be up there," Tinker said, A hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. One of the guards began yelling at him in rapid-fire Arabic. Tinker shrugged and tried to pull away, but the guard grabbed his burqa around his chest and yanked him close, spraying the dirty black cloth with spittle. His partner started to scream louder and pointed at Bat's boots. The black fabric was too short and no one had paid attention to them until now, but women on the Saracen did not wear space boots, and they knew something was up. Bat grabbed the one holding Tinker by the collar, twisted, twirled, and tossed him into the other two. Before the three had finished falling, he was on them with 3 swift punches to the side of the head that left them knocked out in a heap. We have got to hurry. He reached for Mona Lisa's arm, but shrugged him off and took off running down the corridor. Bat sprinted after her and didn't wait to see if Tinker caught up. They made it to the location where Khan had directed them. Tinker slid to a stop and keyed in the access code. Nothing happened. "Khan!" he growled under his breath. Mona Lisa pushed him aside to punch in the numbers again. The hatch slid open. It can't be that simple. She didn't wait for an answer. She stepped into the room and lifted a simple smooth metal cube from the pedestal off to one side. What is that guy who said the simplest solution is usually right? Sherlock Holmes, said Bat. Occam, Tinker corrected. She stepped across the threshold into the hallway. An alarm blared throughout the corridor as red lights strobed in blinding flashes. Simple, screamed Bat. Get us back to the ship. What? Tinker yelled back. Get us back to the ship. I can't hear you. We need to get back to the ship. Follow me. The pilot began sprinting down the metal deck and slid to a stop as a squadron of Saracen guards rounded the corner with swords drawn. Tinker tried to stop, but his feet went out from under him and his run turned into a base slide that brought him up 2 steps short of the guards' boots. They laughed down at him. Bat ploughed into the mass of them, kicking, punching, jabbing and punting before they had time to recover. He stood up from the tumble of human bodies and looked back at Mona Lisa, still by the door. Don't, he screamed. She took one look at the cube in her hand and the distance between them in the corridor. A nanosecond later she sprinted in the opposite direction. Bat untangled himself from the press of bodies. Come on! Tinker scrambled up after him. They raced after Mona Lisa as she tried to escape. Chapter 21. Mona Lisa ran. The hijab got in her way. The covering was designed to hide, not for athletic endeavours, and the flowing fabric threatened to wrap around her feet and trip her up. She almost paused to hike the edge over her knees, to at least free up that much, but she could hear Bat's pounding boots on the floor behind her, loud, like a train bearing down on her. She tried to run faster, as the thick hands grabbed her from the back of her fabric and yanked. Her feet kept moving, but her body was arrested in mid-flight. The result was a resounding plop that she felt vibrate up her spine. That was going to leave a mark. The cube kept going too, bounding and bouncing off the floor until it came to a rest against the wall and began glowing. Is it going to blow up? Tinker reached down to help her up. You almost made it. She shook off his pawing hands and straightened up the burqa. Not even close, she groused. You won't make it, inmate. Might as well not try. It will just make you tired and frustrated. She bit back a retort. The alarm beeping was lower here, but still annoying. Can we save the bickering for when we reach the ship? Tinker asked. He watched the halls around them. More Saracen guards could pop out at any moment, and they were the only women in the corridor. Too easy to find. Which way? Bat asked. Tinker shrugged. I've got to turn around. Mona Lisa sighed. This way. Why should we trust you? Bat asked. Because I know the way. I don't believe you. Believe me or not, if we stay here, we're going to get caught. He thought about it for a moment and gave in with a long, loud breath. Fine. He motioned her to move, and Tinker fell in step behind them, keeping her tiny form in the middle. She led them away from the room, away from the alarm, and they cowered as more guards ran past them. It wouldn't be long before someone made the connection about 3 women walking away from the room with the missing item, but she hoped they would make the ship before then. They did. The NS-17 was exactly where they docked her, with the addition of 2 guards standing in front of the airlock. Ah! Tinker said as they peeked around the corner. Standard procedure, Bat said. All of the ships will have guards set on them. Do we wait? Bat straightened up and shook his neck and shoulder muscles. Don't you think when you beat up their guards they're going to put 2 and 2 together and come up with us as the crooks? Mona Lisa regarded him with a raised eyebrow. Do you have a suggestion, inmate? 2 of them. Stop calling me inmate, she snapped, and use finesse instead of the dead space between your ears you call a brain. She slipped around the corner of the hall and marched towards the guards. They instantly snapped to attention. As she approached, Mona Lisa whirled the edge of the fabric up and over her head, letting it fall and trail behind her in one hand. What's she doing? Bat muttered. Whatever it is, she's doing it right. She's going to get us killed, but what a way to go. Bat shook his head and got ready. Mona Lisa turned the charm up to level 10. She swished and swooshed. She clenched her shoulders together to bunch up her breasts, and she pouted her lips and shot one serious bedroom eyes to the 2 guards. They were transfixed. She got closer and thought about what to say. What was going to distract them? What was going to draw them away from the airlock? They would know she was an outsider, of course, but would they consider her a treasure or a threat? The guard on the left spat something in guttural voice, and the other snickered. She stopped. They eyed her up and down, and the one on the left lunged forward and grabbed her by the wrist. He twisted her hard and sent her to her knees. The second guard grabbed her by the hair and began dropping his pants as he dragged her head forward. Mona Lisa almost cried out, but she didn't want to give Bat a satisfaction. He didn't need it. A ham-sized fist ploughed into the guard holding her wrist and slammed him into the bulkhead with a sick crunch. The second guard had time to let go of her hair and make a strange gurgling whimper before another fist pounded his forehead a half-inch back. He sank next to his partner and had time to register a giant boot aimed for his face before it hit, and he never had a thought again. Tinker lifted Mona Lisa up by the arm and didn't say a word as he keyed in the access code to the airlock umbilical. She shivered in relief and glanced at Bat. He didn't check on her. His eyes were too busy scanning the corridor for any approaching threat. But she saw the way he put himself between her and the open space, a human wall of rage ready for any threat. The rational side of her said it was between Tinker and the threat too, or maybe the cube and the threat, or probably all 3. But part of her felt like it was just for her. A knight, some chivalrous code that required his honour-bound commitment to protect her at all costs. The airlock opened with a whoosh, and Tinker led her through the chute into NS-17. Bat was on their heels. They're coming, he warned. They could hear the screams in the hall beyond, the war cries of hundreds Saracen guards running for the airlock. Chapter 23. Mona Lisa took the cube from Bat and rested it on the console in the cockpit. It began to glow a soft blue colour, lines and patterns emerging on the shell. Is it supposed to do that? She shrugged. It's not making any noise. Get us out of here, Bat instructed. Tinker keyed in the ignition sequence and began an abbreviated takeoff checklist. Any time now, Bat chanted. If we rush this, we could end up dead or worse, the pilot muttered, tongue clenched between his teeth. What's worse than death? Mona Lisa asked. Prison on Mars? I've been there. I was thinking the asteroid belt, but I bet Mars plays a close second. What's wrong with the asteroid belt? Remember all those stories you heard about the Wild West on old Earth? Tinker finished the start-up procedure and moved the NS-17 away from the Saracen. I saw some movies, she said. It's like that, only worse in space. Bat watched through the view screen as the ship slipped away from the floating hulk of junk that was a gigantic caliphate. He didn't relax until they were out of range of any weapons the welded derelicts might have, and then eased back in the seat with a groan. I need a drink. My man. Tinker perked up. He engaged the autopilot and hopped over their legs to rush back to the captain's quarters and return with 2 bottles of clear hooch and almost 3 clean glasses. We can toast to victory. It's not victory yet, Bat said, but he took a glass and bottle and filled it to the rim. Mona Lisa accepted a glass and a much smaller portion from Tinker as they drank. I'm still worried about the cube glowing, Tinker said. You shouldn't be, He squinted at Mona Lisa. Did you say that? She shook her head and stared at the speaker. You don't sound much like a woman. Tinker turned his squint on Bat. Wasn't me. Hello, said a feminine voice from the speaker. The ship can talk, Mona Lisa asked. Why didn't it say something on the way here? I am an artificial construct, advanced intelligence, the voice said. I have utilised my wireless interface to communicate with your ship. How are we going to get her out of my ship? I can hear you. I know you can, Tinker shouted at the speaker. And I want you to know what I plan to do to you. The engine shut down and they started to drift in space. You know we're on approach to the space station hub, Bat said to Tinker. Maybe now is not the time to argue with the computer in charge of the ship. I am not a computer, the AI stated. I am an advanced artificial intelligence. I don't give a bloody hell what you are. Give me back my ship. What are your intentions? To fly. Clarification. What are your intentions with my programming? You are thieves. Mona Lisa glanced back at Bat. She's right. She. It sounds like a she. The temptress rolled her eyes. Besides, I'm tired of being outnumbered. If it's a she, we even up. Mona Lisa swished across the cockpit and felt eyes on her. She turned, half expecting Tinker to be watching her, staring at the bottom as it did interesting things in the modified jumpsuit. But it was Bat. She froze for a second, then smiled and kept walking. She could feel something radiating off him, an almost palatable lust. That's all it took, she thought. Hooch. More, she announced, returning with a jug of clear white liquid Tinker used to capture the drippings off his still. She sloshed some into Bat's cup and traded smiles, then refilled her glass and the pilot's. After all, it was a celebration, plus there was nowhere to escape out in space, unless she got them both drunk and dropped them through the airlock, which she didn't think she would do. Yet, Bat lifted his glass, sipped it and sat back down with watery eyes as it burned all the way down and hit his stomach. His shoulders dropped a little, his eyes dropped even more. Maybe, he said, just a slight slur in his voice. The best of us are killed in war. He looked at Mona Lisa, then eyes drilled into her. Could she have been wrong, mistaken his nostalgia for an interest in her? The bold, he toasted, and took a sip. The strong, he sipped again. The brave all go die in battle, and what's left are the ghosts of heroes. His eyes watered more, and he wiped at the corner of one with the back of his hand before a rebellious tear could make a run down his razor-sharp cheek. Were you a soldier? She asked, in her real voice, not the quotish one she used to get her way, not the snappy, sarcastic tone designed to keep everyone at distance. Her true voice. She knew he had heard her. No way not to. The cockpit was too tight. The thought made her grin, just a small one, because it sounded sexual in her mind, a little dirty. He thought the grin was a gift to him, and gave half one back. Not much, a curl at the corner of his mouth that lifted his cheek. What's left? She asked, after the best are gone. He made a motion with half a glass of hooch, taking in the ship and Tinker and even space beyond, a generous gesture, all-encompassing. I was in war once, said the pilot. He sounded offended in a distracted way, as if he couldn't be bothered by an insult, implied or otherwise. We've all been in a war. Bat drained the glass. That's all Mars is. All it will be. It's the way things work, she said, as if she knew such things about such things. Bat knew different. She had been pampered, spoiled, her beauty came early, and with it, difference on the part of men who wanted to touch that beauty, possess it. Sheltered, he slurred under his breath, almost like a sigh. She took it as an insult and huffed. He supposed he must have meant it as such. I was. She started to say the word not, an automatic argument, an old defence, but she stopped, because inside of a spaceship hurtling through the stars with nothing to distract her but 50 million potential deaths, including her own, let her pause to reflect. A decade with Buster, a year in prison getting ready to turn evidence against him. She had not grown up a princess, but become one at 18. Buster made it so. He treated her like a treasure and thought she listened and she learned. He also kept her isolated, hidden away, or so he thought. Bat leaned forward to set an empty glass down, missed the console and fought to keep his balance on the chair. He won that victory, but only just. The best make good babies and leave them to be raised by weak men, he slurred. Still easy to understand though. Mona Lisa thought this might be a soapbox platform for him, familiar ground. Generations, each gene pool smaller than the next, brave men dead, gone, less and less. She watched his head nod and bob, eyes drooping. His skull bounced off the back cushion and stayed there. Mona Lisa took a dainty sip from her glass, grimaced as she swallowed fire. Tinker laughed. Bunch of lightweights, he joked. It doubles as rocket fuel. I just thought he was a lightweight. The pilot quaffed his glass and set it in a regular spot on the console, a homemade triangle welded to the metal as a cup holder. He is. Guess some of us are strong in different ways. You want to find out? The eyebrows wiggled, the smile a suggestive leer. She realised it was an act. The idea came quick. If she ever made a move, he would find an excuse, and if she waited for him to do it, it would take forever. I want to learn to fly, she flirted back. A game. Think you can teach me? Chapter 24. I've calculated the probabilities of what use a spacefaring ganglord will have with me, the AI said. None of them are pleasant activities, but we need you to trade, Mona Lisa explained. He knows where Buster is. There are lots of lives at stake. This is a classical dilemma throughout the history of time, the AI answered. Does the good of the many outweigh the good of the one? You are not a person, said Tinker. You're a freaking computer. But so much more, said the AI. The ship lights flickered and the engine shut down. Tinker frantically punched buttons and keyed in sequences, but nothing worked. The alarm light over the door began twirling, bathing the cabin in red strobes. What's she doing? Bat screamed. She's opening the door. Hey! Bat yelled at the ceiling. Hey! That's going to kill us! I know, said the AI. If I could feel regret, I would, but the needs of the many do not outweigh my rights. Wait! Shouted Mona Lisa. Please wait! If there is any other way. A loud hiss filled the cabin. What now? She's venting our oxygen. Tinker stared at the screen. He fell to his knees and, rooted in the recess under the console, began stripping wires. That will not work, the AI informed him. I'm fully invested in all systems. Damn it! An alarm began blaring through the cockpit as the red lights twirled. Critical atmosphere, Tinker bellowed. Bat sat in his seat and crossed his arms. If he was going to die, it certainly wasn't going to beg for his life. Everybody died. That was his philosophy. He tried to live, at least when he wasn't killing people in the past or watching people live in cells in the present. Except that wasn't living, was it? He felt his vision constrict as the atmosphere dropped too low to support life. Pat realised that in working at prison he was as trapped as the prisoners, but it was worse than he ever imagined, because he didn't have to go there. He fell out of the chair and plopped to the floor next to Tinker, who took one last breath and fell out beside him. Mona Lisa was tiny. Her small frame required less oxygen, and she took tiny breaths. She still felt her lungs constrict and work harder. Her hands and toes began to tingle, and her world went dark. Chapter 25. His head pounded. He wondered who hit him with a bat, and reached his hand back to feel the tender spot that throbbed on his skull. But the skin didn't hurt. The headache was inside. His memory came back. Red lights, the alarm, cold darkness of space. Except he could breathe. Bat opened his eyes. The lights of the cabin were dim, letting the wash of stars in the view screen shine in a brilliant rainbow of colours. A gentle hum of the engines vibrated under him as he pushed himself up. Tinker lay across his legs, snoring. Mona Lisa was stretched out in her seat, leaning against the straps that held her in place. Bartholomew Marshall, the AI intoned. You didn't kill us? Mr. Marshall, I would sooner destroy a classic work of art as to kill you. Who's a work of art? Tinker sat up, rubbing his head. We're not dead. What happened? I needed you to know how serious I was about not falling into the hands of Mr. Kim. You could have just asked. I did. Yeah, next time ask louder. Mona Lisa stirred in her seat. Did we die? If I have spent the rest of my life with you guys in the afterworld, this is going to suck. We're not dead yet, Bat answered. Is she still going to suck us into space? She? You said the ship was a girl, right? And she's in the ship now. She. No, Tinker said. This is a temporary situation. I can't have an AI running my ship. I have made over 200 adjustments to your system to improve operational efficiency, said the AI. That proves she's a woman, Tinker moaned, already trying to make changes to a finely tuned machine. I've maximised our fuel consumption rates to gain greater economy and extend our ability to increase speed. What's wrong with how fast we're going? It's more efficient. Ah, Tinker threw up his hands. Get back in the box. Hang on, said Bat. How are you changing the systems? Rewriting subroutines. You're able to write programs? Yes. Can you just create a new program and download it into the box from Mr. Kim, a mini you? The lights flickered. I am unable to self-replicate. The hum of the engines filled the compartment in a steady-sounding thrum. Bat noticed there was less vibration in the hull. Whatever she had done was working. She called Bat a work of art, Tinker told Mona Lisa. She eyed him with an arched eyebrow. Street art? Modern art? Seriously? I don't get it. There's nothing to get. Why did you say that about you? No reason. Why did you say that about him? She directed a question to the ceiling. Bartholomew Marshall is a... Nobody, he said in a loud voice. My name is Bat. The lights dimmed and went bright again, but the AI kept silent as Mona Lisa and Tinker just watched him. You got something you want to tell us? I love secrets. Mona Lisa rubbed her hands together. Your secrets are what got us here. Her face fell in disappointment. You're no fun. I am a laugh riot, inmate. She blanched and turned back towards the view screen, the tension in her shoulders matching the icy glare in her eyes as she stared into space. Bat watched the back of her head for a moment, debating if he should say something. But it passed and he turned to the AI instead. If you can't self-replicate, can you write a routine that's a new AI? They could almost hear the processors in the ship whirring as the AI made a million calculations to determine if it violated her protocol. Done, she said. You did it? Your suggestion was a clever idea. I have created a new version of my program and downloaded it into the cube. You may deliver it to Mr. Kim. Tinker picked it up and snatched his hands back, dropping it to the floor with a clang. It's freezing, he laughed at himself as he shook his hands to get circulation flowing. An ice cube. Intelligent computer emulation, the AI said in what sounded like a thoughtful tone through the ship's speakers. Ice. It's as good a name as any, said Bat. I do not have a name, said the AI. Why can't you be Ice, and we'll call this something else? I am Ice, the cube stated. It is ice, the AI answered. This is going to blow my mind. Tinker stared from the cube on the floor to the speaker in the wall. Computers arguing with each other over a name. I am Ice, and I am not. Whoa. Look, you're the ship, right? Mona Lisa squirmed around and spoke to the speaker. Her eyes never left Bat's face, and he felt lucky there weren't lasers. I am the ship, the AI agreed. Then your name is NS-17. That is not a name. Nessie, Tinker offered. Nessie is a cow's name, said Bat. We're not calling the ship Nessie. Junebug, Mona Lisa squealed. Your ship looks like a Junebug beetle. Tinker nodded. Junebug. Tinker nodded. It fits. How about it, Junebug? Bat called to the speaker. The lights dimmed and flickered. It is an acceptable name. Welcome to the crew, Junebug. Chapter 26. I just want to remind you, Tinker slunk along behind Bat and Mona Lisa. A friend is still looking for you. Bat carried the ice cube tucked under one arm. Are you any good at sneaking? I'm an excellent sneaker, Mona Lisa whispered. I bet you're excellent at everything you do. Tinker wiggled his eyebrows. Want to try? Why are we whispering? It's part of sneaking, right? He asked Bat. Not normally. Bat led them through the narrow corridors of the space hub after Junebug had docked them on a different loading platform. You've done this before? Bat kept the ice tucked under his arm and ignored the question. What did you do? He kept ignoring them as they rounded a bulkhead corner to make their way to Mr. Kim's section of the ship. Yes, Sunshine, what did you do? Ian stood in front of them, blocking the way. Technically, he wasn't blocking the way. The two mounds of necklace muscled flesh that flanked him blocked most of the corridor, with Ian plugging the gap in the middle. One of them had a wire across his jaw and clenched his fists as his tiny eyes glared at Bat. Remember me? He growled through gritted teeth. Nice hardware, said Bat. He moved his body between Mona Lisa, Tinker, and the threat, corralling them closer to the wall. Two more massive men blocked the way behind them. When I say, Bat began. Run! Tinker screamed. He slammed a metal ball against the steel decking, and it exploded in a cloud of noxious dust in front of the two men behind them. Mona Lisa bolted between them as they clawed at their eyes, choking and wheezing. She let out the breath she was holding and disappeared around the corner. Tinker gave chase, but couldn't keep up. She gained seconds as he tried to squeeze through the twin pillars of human flesh that blocked the way. He was just able to avoid their pawing hands and get past them when he saw the other two thugs pounce on Bat and dragged him away. Tinker gave a thought to helping. He gave a thought to hiding and maybe trying to find an alarm to sound, but he wasn't sure what good it would do. Ian would have the cops in his pocket around here. There might not be even cops on this section of the station, just his thugs, in which case sounding the alarm would just draw undue attention on himself. He gave a few more seconds of a debate, then skittered on the floor as he raced towards the spot where Mona Lisa disappeared. The two thugs tossed Bat into an airlock and stared at Ian with dumb looks on their faces. What are you waiting on? A guided invitation? The two men stood dumbfounded. Get in there and kill him. He glanced away from the portal to argue with someone, and when he turned back, his two goons were on the floor. One of them was looking at him, which was weird since the fella's body was still facing forward, and Bat stood against the far wall, straddling the ice, waiting. What the hell? Ian screamed, spraying spittle into the double-panelled window. Get in there and make him dead! Ian sent 4 goons to the door. And this time keep it open. I want to watch. The 4 goons rushed Bat. Ian got to watch as he dismantled them in 4 quick moves. His hands chopped, his feet kicked. He gripped and twisted and never took a deep breath. It was over in less than 3 seconds. 4 bodies joined the 2 on the floor and none of them moved. You son of a bitch! Ian seethed. Bat bent over and scooped up the ice. I've been called worse. I'm going to... A fist connected with his jaw and sent him sprawling on the grungy corridor floor. Blood spluttered from his nose and dripped a Rorschach pattern on the deck plating. Tinker stepped in the doorway, shaking his fist. That's gonna leave a mark. You all right? Bat stepped out of the airlock. Close that thing, will you? Tinker used his uninjured hand to shut the airlock and sealed it. Thanks. Yeah, we've got to look out for each other, don't we? Plus, I need help. Bat saw Mona Lisa and Mr. Kim behind him. The 9-foot giant was stooped forward to keep the top of his head from banging on the tubes and pipes that lined the ceiling. Mr. Kim had a dozen bodyguards prepared behind him, but a motion from his long fingers put them at ease. I tried to assure your shipmates that my intervention was completely unnecessary, Mr. Kim said in his cultured accent. Mona Lisa stood on the tips of her toes to peer through the porthole. Her eyes went wide at the carnage inside. Are they dead? Bat shrugged. Who are you? No one of coincidence, he said, but he stared at Mr. Kim as he said it. And this? He nudged Ian with his boot. Bat glanced at the ice. He wanted this too. Mr. Kim glanced from the airlock to the ice and back again before his eyes finally settled on Bat, and he nodded. That is a story I can sell. He made a motion and the guards swarmed around him. 4 of them scooped up Ian and carried him down the corridor back towards a section of the hub. The other guard moved between Bat and the airlock. One reached up and hit a button. The outer hatch rolled open and sucked the dead bodies out into the void. I believe that's mine. Mr. Kim held out his hand. Bat placed the ice in his hand. Mr. Kim spun it around, staring at the plain, unadorned cube, and a slow smile spread across his face. You have fulfilled your end of our agreement, he said, eyes locked on the ice. You will find who you are looking for at... He paused and glanced up at them. AI? The ice lit up. I am ice, it said in a robotic monotone. Independent computer emulation. Connect with my personal network and transfer the coordinates of the treasure they are seeking. The subfile is marked. He shared another giant smile with Mona Lisa. Buster. The cube glowed. Transfer complete, Ice announced. Thus our business is complete. Another motion and the guard swirled around the giant, trailing in his wake as he walked away. Bat looked through the portal at the now empty airlock and shook his head. Back to the mission, he said, and led them to the dock where Junebug waited. Chapter 27. Mr. Kim was right, said Tinker as he keyed up the view screen. There it is. I can access the view screen, Junebug said. So can I, Tinker snapped, without being told. This isn't helping. Bat leaned between the pilot and the co-pilot seat and stared at the image of the ship flying through space. Does that look funny to you? Tinker stopped glaring at the speaker and crinkled his eyes at the view screen. I think it looks kind of nice. Bat reached up to press a key, but Tinker caught his hand. What are you doing? Zooming out. Listen, this whole setup is very technical and sort of touchy. I can't just let you go banging away on the console because you have no idea what will happen. Done, Junebug announced. Damn it, ship. Bat studied the screen. Check his trajectory, he instructed Junebug. He will hit the dipole shield in 2 days. Bat sat back in his seat. That's a good thing, Tinker said. We've got time to figure it out. Figure what out? Mona Lisa asked. How to stop it? Why is he moving so slow? They watched as the ship on the view screen grew larger as they approached. It's a small cruiser, Tinker identified. A Class A personal luxury yacht. Junebug split the screen in half and pulled up schematics to show the type and class of the vessel. The interior capacity is for 8, with a hold designed for recreational space travel. I am unable to determine current occupancy or payload as no manifest has been filed with any authority. He wouldn't do that, said Bat. Not with what he has planned. He wouldn't do that anyway, Mona Lisa stared at the ship on the screen. Not in his nature to tell the authorities anything he's doing. But he told someone he's planning to destroy the shield, asked Bat. She shrugged. Or someone told us, that's what he said. Bat quirked up an eyebrow and glared at the screen. Scan them. That's military-grade technology and not a piece of my current complement. I was going to tell him that. Damn. Hail them. The speaker chirped. They are not answering. Is anyone aboard? Bat wondered. Something about this is not adding up. He pursed his lips in thoughtful contemplation. They sent us out here to stop your fiancée from committing a terrorist act. Mona Lisa crossed her arms and didn't sneer when Tinker was distracted by it. Ex-fiancée? But the ship, they claim, is on a dead man's course for the target. What's a dead man's course? She asked. A set it and forget it autopilot. Like Junebug, said Tinker. I am not an automatic pilot, the ship defended itself. I am an advanced artificial intelligence construct. Are you flying my ship? I am in control. Automatically? Play on words notwithstanding, I am not more than just a push-the-button stone course flight program. Junebug sounded indignant. Don't piss off the person in charge of life control, said Bat. I am the pilot, Tinker reminded them. What now? But Bat and Mona Lisa said nothing. Neither of them had any ideas. Chapter 28. It was something, he thought, something different than what it seemed. The past had taught him that. A ship on collision course with an automated unarmed station that would kill 1 million or more people. To what purpose? Love? Would one man destroy a planet just to kill the woman who wouldn't love him back? She wanted to escape. That's much he knew. He could see it in her calculations, the way she watched everything, even him. Especially him. Some men would be flattered by the attention, but Bat knew she was looking for a weakness. Her beauty was a distraction, like the way she used her breasts and hips and behind to keep people guessing. And while they guessed she was eye candy, a dumb bimbo, all boobs and ass and sex appeal, they never looked underneath. She was smart as hell and a survivor, a deadlier combination than her looks, to be sure. But would a man kill for that? Because she outsmarted him and outlived 2 of his assassination attempts? Maybe. He'd never been in love, and passion was something he reserved for later in life, if he'd ever found him. He had been with dozens of women over his life and considered himself an adequate lover, not too bad, and no one ever voiced complaints to his face. A little creative where it was called for, but efficient. It made him just a little sad in what was how he considered himself at most things, efficient. Even when passion was called for, it was probably why he was alone. Preferred being alone, actually. Easy to fight the ghosts that way. No bother to anyone, just doing his time watching prisoners do theirs, until now. Now he was in the thick of it again, and he couldn't find the angle. He couldn't figure out what was going on, and that bothered him. Because part of being efficient at love, at fight, at war, and at play was figuring things out fast. Now the straightforward mission to deliver the inmate to radio a halt message to her fiancée had thrown a curveball. Ex-fiancée, he reminded himself, and that made him chuckle. What's so funny? He glanced up to see her staring at him. Large dark eyes, with makeup a little smudged. The steady fall and rise of her artistically presented bosom, moist lips in a permanent pout. You. What did I do? She crinkled her eyebrows and raised them, forming the finest line between them, and highlighting the beginnings of laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. He thought they added character because laugh lines came from laughing, something he was sure she had done a lot of before prison. Something he wondered if she would do more of soon, after this was over. You made a joke, inmate, he snapped. It came out harsher than he meant, but the desired effect was the same. She turned around and stopped studying him, stopped searching for an angle. He sighed and bit back an apology. Those were simple facts. She was an inmate, he was a guard. They were on a mission. He needed to concentrate on the task at hand. Get us closer to that ship, he said. All right, said Tinker. The hum of the engines changed as their speed increased. Done, Junebug answered. Damn it, let me drive this ship. Fly, the AI corrected. Bat let them bicker and tune them out. He watched the ship, but his mind was on something else, or someone else, pouting in the chair in front of him. Chapter 29. Bat stood up from his seat. It's a trap. Tinker flinched and gripped his chest. Holy hell, man, you scared me to death. Don't jump up screaming like that in my ship. Why do you think it's a trap? Mona Lisa tracked the guard. Intuition, he muttered. I wish we could stop it from here. Tinker coughed and searched for a drink. His glass was empty, but he turned it up anyway, then spent a few minutes fumbling in an empty cubbyhole for more hooch. Spill it, Bat ordered. No. Tinker wouldn't meet his eye. I didn't spill any of it. It's too good to waste. You're stalling, said Mona Lisa. He's stalling. Your heart rate has increased to an almost dangerous level, Junebug added. You're perspiring despite the cabin maintaining an optimal temperature. He's lying. Bat put a hand on the pilot's shoulder. I haven't said anything, Tinker defended. A crimson flush spread up his neck and painted his cheeks. What are you hiding? I may know something that might work, he squirmed. And they're in the hold. What's in the hold? Missiles. You have missiles in the hold? Military missiles? He cringed. Bat raised his hand and Tinker flinched, fearing the slap that would follow, but Bat didn't hit him. Don't leave me hanging, said the guard. Tinker eased his palm up to Bat's hand and slapped them together. That's the world's weakest high five, Bat huffed. We're in space, Mona Lisa critiqued. Galactic wuss high five. Tinker slapped again. The sound echoed in the cabin. Bat swung the sting out of his hand and grinned. That's more like it. Let's blow the ship up. Why don't I know about these? Junebug asked. They're my secret weapons. But I am the ship. It's my ship, said Tinker. I'm the pilot. But I should know about these things. I had it on a separate independent network. Doesn't even touch the ship's computers. No wireless, he crackled, like my still. I need to be fully aware of all ship functions and capability, Junebug lectured, if you expect me to optimize our performance capacity. Can you shoot those damn things? Tinker's fingers clacked around the small keyboard. If you turn control over to me, I will be able to aim better than you. Aiming ain't an art, sweetheart. Tinker jabbed the enter key. It's a science. Two tiny portals opened on the belly of the ship, and twin rocket trails lit up the starry night as they twisted towards the target. They hit at the same time. Tiny sparks like firecrackers bounced off the hull. That was anticlimactic, said Mona Lisa. Wait for it. The belly of the ship bulged like an overblown balloon, cracking the hull open into 1,000 pieces. The demolitions on board exploded out into a giant fireball of destruction. Penetrating incendiaries, Tinker giggled. Those are illegal. Lucky for us we don't have a cop on board, he said, eyeing Bat. The guard stared beyond the destruction, at the dipole shield, safe beyond. Lucky indeed, he answered. Junebug, set a course for home. Hey! Tinker complained. I'm the pilot. Junebug, make it so. You can't say that, said Mona Lisa. I just did. It reminds me of him. He used to say that all the time. She wiped the corner of an eye and stared at the floating cloud of partially vaporized debris that drifted away from the explosion vector. He wasn't aboard. He might have been. He tried to kill you twice. That doesn't mean we didn't have something special. It's only right to mourn the dead. Bat shook his head. I'll never understand relationships. She moved her hand and he could see there were no tears. No, you won't. Junebug engaged the engines and set a course for the prison. Chapter 30. You said home, but it's back to a cell for me. She said it aloud to Bat, but didn't look at him as she did. The warden promised you a reduced sentence. But it's still behind bars. I'll be trapped again. Tinker studied the yoke in front of him and sighed. I'll be back hustling runs. Bat didn't answer either of them, but he was thinking about prison too. He was thinking about how convenient it was that that ship was exactly where Mr. Kim said, how no one else could share that information with Space Command. He thought about the whys behind it. Sure, Buster tried to buy bodyguards at prisons. He had to. If he really wanted Mona Lisa dead, all he would take was some precisely applied leverage to get one of the guards to do it for him. It'd start with families. Obviously, a lot of men would do hideous things to save their families. It's what made Bat particularly good for this job. He had no family. No one to kidnap or torture to make him do things. No one to hold against him. No one to miss him if he disappeared. Bat glanced at the back of the pilot's head. No official pilot granted. This trip was unsanctioned. Technically, Folds could have turned Mona Lisa over to Buster instead of giving her 48 hours to find him, or find his ship. If something happened to Bat, no one would care. There would have been some extra paperwork, but he didn't have relatives listed that would miss him if he were gone, just like Tinker. The man had memories of a dead cat and nothing else besides his ship. If he disappeared in a puff of space dust, it would just be another smuggler lost to the cosmos. Hell, there were hundreds of those missing each year, either prospecting in the asteroid belt or pirated and left to float to some distant star, never to be seen again. If Tinker vanished, no one would care. He shifted in his seat. "Ship," he called out. "Run a calculation analysis." Mona Lisa and Tinker glanced back at him. "What are you analysing?" she asked. "We did it." He began to explain his line of thinking. "We completed the mission and saved Mars." "Yeah?" said Tinker. "I can count those bonus credits now." "But what if we weren't supposed to do it?" "Beat Buster?" Mona Lisa squirmed. "We didn't. He's still out there looking for me." Bat shook his head. He wasn't explaining it like he wanted. "What if we were supposed to die on the ship or fail at any number of places? If you didn't stop the ship, what would have happened? I'd get turned over to Buster, where he would kill you. Third time's the charm." "But we stopped the ship, and we didn't go on it. We blew it up with unlicensed and unregistered weaponry that no one knew you had." "I don't think we needed to mention that in a report," Tinker spluttered. "I don't want to get in trouble." Bat waved him off. "We were supposed to be on the ship when it blew up. That was the plan. But we weren't. We were here." "How did they know we would get on the ship?" Mona Lisa argued. "Because we would have had to do it that way." Bat sat up in his seat as the puzzle pieces fell together. "We would have pulled alongside the ship, attached the umbilical, gone through the airlock, and when we were on board it, would have been blown up." "But it didn't," said Mona Lisa as she chewed on her lip. It sounded like Buster, like something he had done to a competitor in space junk. He didn't like them taking a small slice of the financial pie when they salvaged derelict equipment and debris, so he set a trap on an abandoned ship. It's exactly what Bat described. The 3-man crew hooked onto the floating wreck, snaked over in an umbilical, and set off a booby trap that took out both ships. "It didn't know we had missiles," she concluded. "I wouldn't be missed," said Bat, and pointed at Tinker. "No one would miss you." "And I'd be dead." "For something like that to happen, the way you're describing it, he would have needed an inside man," the pilot pouted. "And plenty of people would miss me." "Who would even know you were gone?" Bat snapped as his brow crinkled. He said it in an offhanded way, but realised it just a second later. "I'm sorry," he offered. "I didn't mean it like that." "Lots of people. Bob would have missed me." "Bob's dead." Tinker rested his forehead on his forearms and held in a sob. His left foot tapped on the floorboard. "What's taking so long with this damn AI? Is it on the fritz?" "I assure you I am not on the fritz," Junebug said through the speaker. "I have a name." "Is this computer giving me attitude?" "I am not giving you attitude," Junebug explained in a slow, patient voice. "I am quite capable of answering your query, as I have access to over 1 million forms of communication, including a private message between the warden and your fiancé." "X," Mona Lisa and Bat said together. She smiled at him. It was a smile that sent men to war with another, and she had shared it with Tinker, and he was flying the ship that might have crashed. Bat let the warmth of the smile wash over him like a wave. He took a deep breath and smiled back. Just a small one. Just for a minute. But it was real, and she could tell. However, Junebug continued, I will require you to address me by name if you desire my assistance. Can we unplug that thing? Bat snorted. Thing? I am an artificial intelligent lifeform created for the express purpose of... Tinker pulled on the yoke. What are you doing? Trying to shut you up. We get it. Smart AI, very smart, excellent driver. You're an excellent driver. Flying. It sounded like Junebug sniffed. Analysis complete. You said messages between Folds and Buster, said Bat. That was it, wasn't it? The connection. It seems your warden is on a new payroll. Your return to Mars could cause irreparable harm to yourself and others. Bat scooted back in the seat. He stared at the other two crew members for a second and let out a raspberry. I got nothing but dirty words, he grunted. We go back. I'm dead. Mona Lisa curled her legs up in the seat and turned to face them in a tight cockpit. We all are. I didn't do anything, Tinker argued. You survived. Well, said the pilot as he fished a clear bottle of hooch out of a secret compartment and took a pull. I am good at that. Seems like we all are. Bat stared at the view screen. Computer? There was no answer. What did we call this thing again? June? My name is Junebug. Junebug? Yes. Set a course for McMurdo Base. I know some people who can help us figure it out. Tinker cleared his throat and held out the bottle of hooch to Mona Lisa. She took a dainty sip and passed it to Bat. 2 things, Tinker counted off on his fingers. 1, McMurdo is restricted airspace. We can't get in there. I'll handle it, said Bat. What else? Junebug doesn't fly the ship. I'm the pilot. He grabbed the yoke again and shook it, as if it would magically give him control over the thrusters and rockets. Junebug rated power into the circuits at the console and let him turn the ship at least. Mona Lisa watched Bat take a drink as the ship altered trajectory and set in a new course. Guess we're stuck with each other for a while. Bat swallowed, took another gulp and stared at her for a minute. Yeah, Mona Lisa, it looks like we are. The end. The adventure continues in Planet 9, the Dipole Series by Chris Lowry. This has been the Dipole Shield, a science fiction action adventure comedy. The Dipole Series Book 6, written by Chris Lowry, narrated by Steve Downs, copyright 2017 by Christopher D. Lowry, production copyright by Christopher D. Lowry.